Right, this is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter. And one of the things we like to do on this show is break the fourth wall and sort of tell you at home what we're thinking and how we do the show. So in the same way as I always make fun of the fact that Maui always picks as like his good point is like, someone paid me to talk about CS recently. I mean, that's good for the space. Like we do these like mad self-indulgent ones. So similarly, I'll do a similar one, which is now that Ne0kai has worked with me, I will now acknowledge he exists in esports as before. And you know, he wasn't in the Thorin universe, was he? He weren't in that part of esports at the time. You graduated now. Welcome to Hogwarts.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to finally be part of esports. You know, it only took like 4 years, but we've made it eventually.
Exactly. They have to understand, before I used to think naively, like a lot of people, gatekeeping's bad because, you know, you think of keeping out cool people, but then you realise gatekeeping is good to keep out the dickheads and let the cool people in. So what I'm doing now is I've actually decided... There's an old joke you could make years ago about having to like stop all certain immigration, Maui, until we've sorted out a certain problem in the world. It's like that in esports. I'm calling a halt to all immigration into esports, and I'm going to personally, as a one-man test, approve individually people and gatekeep them into the scene. So Ne0kai can join the scene. Now let's wait and find out which one of your favourite tier 2 casters will join next. That's you can place bets in the comments, and we'll see. Joke is, I won't know any of them, so I won't be able to let any of them join. Right. Now, this episode begins with me wearing this t-shirt, and anyone who has seen past episodes, obviously Maui has one as well, so does Kassad, so does Richard, so does Monty. This is obviously the Into the AM, isn't it, which is this t-shirt company, but a lot more than just t-shirts that we've worked with many, many, many times. A part of LFN, and they have now sponsored Snake and Banter, as well as many other shows such as Summoning Insight and a lot of the League of Legends shows, Hot Take Point Made, etc. Now, one of the cool things about this t-shirt company is, first of all, they have loads of like nice printed designs like that, which I think are pretty cool. This is like sort of like it's trying to be like Shogunate Japan, but with like almost like neo elements, so it's got like neon lights on and stuff. I have a whole bunch that are pretty good. I like the pastoral, like chill designs. I have ones with like, again, like a bonsai tree in the background or whatever, that's all scenic and looks all lovely. By the way, if you want any like classic style, they have unbranded tees as well, which is just the collar, but it's like a nice fabric. I actually do think the fabric's one of the better features about the t-shirt, which is like, not only is the design good, but it's not just like a printed design where you wash it a few times and it gets really horrible and you just have to buy a new one. Like basically this one, I've washed it a million times. It's just as stretchy now. It's still maintain the same texture. It just seems like a really well-designed t-shirt. So obviously we've advertised this company many, many times in the past, thanks to them for not only sponsoring our videos, people buying them. I always let people know that whenever they have one of these adverts, our code is always 10% off your whatever you buy on their website. But crucially, there isn't a sale now, but just as something to remember, if there ever is a sale in the future, it actually stacks. It's the sale plus whatever our 10% is. So you always get the discount with, as you can see on the screen there, intotheam.com/LFN. They actually also, because their discount applies to everything on the store, also applies to other things within their site. Like, for example, they do bundles of t-shirts. You can get 3 graphic tees like this at $61.95. You can then obviously get the percentage off as well. They do basic 3 tees, like I said, just different colors, simple ones, $52.95 for that. So if you want to get 10% off one of these delightful, doesn't have to be a t-shirt, they've got loads of stuff on their store, by the way. They've also got a million choices as well. They have so many different prints and so many designs, so many types of apparel, etc. Way more than I've got. I've mainly just got the t-shirts. Then go to intotheam.com/LFN and get 10% off and support this network. Right, let's get into the episode now. So Ne0kai, we always operate on the Fight Club rule here, that the guest obviously has to go first. So what is your good point, what we bring into the table?
Sure. I feel like news was like a little bit kind of slower this week, so there wasn't kind of that slam dunk point of like, kind of, I guess you could talk about like the Falcons are simple in previous weeks or Caine, etc. I think for me, I went a little bit more macro here. So the way I kind of went about it, it's something that I think about a lot, and I build up names and lists of these people. But I think that these days there is more superstar caliber players than in lower tiers than there basically ever has been before. Okay. And I think it's only going to continue improving. I think a lot of this comes down to, obviously, we can talk about things. And I think, previous episodes, people have talked about, I think Ash talked about it a bit, about when we talk about the academy teams. I think that's a very good example of where that's the proving grounds for a lot of these kind of players. Obviously, MOUZ is the prime example of them now, but even these days, like to current day, Spirit Academy and Na'Vi Jr., incredible talent in there. There's a guy in Spirit Academy called Kaisuke who's been farming. He's like top 5 in FPL always. Ridiculous stats against like top level teams. I'm pretty sure like Spirit Academy have won something ridiculous like 13 out of the last 15.
Right.
Navi Junior have won 14 out of the last 15, and they're against like decent teams, 3D Max, teams who are in the RMR. They're obviously just not permittable. And there's a lot of very good talent coming through. So for me, I feel like this is sort of one of those times where it's all about just people don't know exactly how to find them or how to use them. And when I talk about kind of how to find them and use them, I think the prime example for me is kind of, especially currently, is MOUZ. MOUZ has been around for ages, but I think a lot of more kind of casual people only really know about him recently from G2.
Sure.
But I feel like previous teams he's been on, like Team One's a really good example, Double Nation, they just like didn't really know how to use him properly. He was playing pretty awful spots. There was a lot of like team drama that people spoke about where like it was like the friends club MOUZ as a sort of extra player. So he wasn't really utilized well until M80 had him playing his proper roles. But even these days as well, we're seeing like Jota on Sangao. He was in the Eternal Fire Academy. I never think they should have let him go, but they didn't really know how to fit him in towards that main team. Now I think he's better than a few players on that main team, and he proved it with what we saw at Pro League, what we've seen him doing in kind of Tier 2 there, this like insane lower bracket run for ESL Challenger League, like the online, like top division, where they went in at the first round of the lower bracket, won every single game there and flawlessly, and the best of 5 to qualify for this most recent Pro League. So there's a lot of players coming through. We were in Finland and we saw kind of Ne0kai, who was from MOUZ and XT. We saw Kaspersky, Pody, who came from the ENCE Academy too. A lot of these players who are starting to come through now. I wouldn't really call Pody right now like superstar potential, but I think Ne0kai actually generally does have that potential to be like a top 10 player. Apex is touching it as well, so he also believes. Granted, we could talk about like kind of French bias maybe, but for me, I think at the moment with all these academy sides, and not even just academy teams, there's like a lot of these like 16, 17-year-olds that are coming through the lower tiers. There's people there that are actually kind of world beaters, but people just need to kind of a better job of finding them. And that's even where maybe the recent article that's kind of taken over Twitter and whatnot about the data revolution, I think is actually one of those big things. They touch on it in the article quite a lot, where they talk about how Ash was using it quite a lot to find players, like for example, Flamus. Now, for me, like Flamus is somebody that I've known for a while in Amiga, but I guess at that top level when they've got other things to focus on, it's not somebody that they know, but they've seen that his opening rates on full gun rounds were like 0.2 better than the average players in his position, but he didn't get that many ecos, so his stats weren't inflated, this, that, and the other. I think this is where, you know, if people are calling on this data surgeons that everybody wants to be talking about right now, this is where I think they're actually going to find a better way of at least scouting out what players are even worth looking at. And then we look into other things about, you know, I think they touched in the article where like Twists spotted Ultimate, but that was through the eye test rather than data. So maybe I think it's going to be a mixture of both. The data is going to rule out which players are not
also,
even worth
by that
at.
logic, Twist should go to fucking Specsavers, mate.
True, but I think the principle is what I like really with this, where it's like the stats just weed out like the real shitters, right? Get rid of the people who are not even worth looking at, or the ones that are like just like overrated for whatever reason, and then like an actual veteran player can be like, right, I actually like what I'm seeing here. This is how he's going to slot into our team. And that's kind of something that Ash has been doing with Gamer Legion with some of the players. Like Slender's an insane example. He was cooking in Tier 2 for a while. Or another great example, just to finish off this kind of point here for me, is Endpoint, right? There was a guy called Ross in Endpoint who did like an algorithm years ago, and he discovered Flames and Nerds and a bunch of other these players who have all gone on to do better things now. Mezzi's another great example, but obviously he'd already had his time in the spotlight, but they used this sort of algorithm that he created. I think he's now working in finance, like top finance as like a data scientist, but he did his own algorithm. He like thought that the
he's the GM of Fnatic. He's the GM of Fnatic.
Yeah, he actually just took that job recently, I believe. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. And I know he went into finance post Endpoint when he left, but basically he spotted all these players with his own custom made algorithm, which essentially broke down data in ways that like apparently people in Endpoint say they like never seen it before, but that's how he found players like Flames and Nerds, etc. So I think that might help it going forward. But I think at the moment the Tier 2 is like an absolute like perfect place to find these next level talent. And it looks like people at the moment are really taking gambles on them too. So I'm looking forward to seeing kind of where the scene goes of how much talent there actually is.
Okay, yeah, so a lot to address there, obviously. First thing I'll take on is the idea that there's a lot of star potential talent in Tier 2. And the first thing that I would say is that I think the question that always needs to be invoked when regarding talent and how they can progress to the higher levels is what their actual longevity is going to look like, and trying to predict that, because as it stands, I feel like there's very little reason that a star player in tier 2 won't at least have some level of success in tier 1 on a good team. It's just that it is very likely that after people understand their tendencies, they can be found out to be a little bit more of a one trick. I think the obvious example of this was Yakindar in recent memory, that it was sort of just the same one-dimensional play over and over again. I feel like that's why people in the beginning were very hesitant to crown Yakindar, because this just didn't feel like it should be able to work, because he was relying purely on mechanics, not on necessarily a cerebral style of playing. In fact, that's the reason that I even touted him early on, is because he was taking gunfights in online matches versus s1mple on an op, and he was winning with an AK. Like, that did feel unsustainable, but I saw it enough times that I was able to recognize, yeah, this guy is insane. But then we see, as he keeps going and going and going, you just can't keep doing that over and over again. And that's really the biggest difference in tier 1 versus tier 2, is that once people start to actually study your tendencies with the greater support crews that they have, then they're going to see, okay, it takes really just one flash to make this guy uncomfortable. Okay, we're just going to throw that every single time. Oh, okay, he has another play. Well, we throw the other counter utility for that play. Okay, now we've killed 2 of his starters on these rounds, which is why actually the people who are, generally speaking, I'd say more seamlessly adapting to tier 1 are late game players. People that say, like a Yimpat, for example, like he was obviously nervous for his first 1 or 2 events when he switched over from MOUZ NXT to MOUZ, but ever since then he's just been stellar. It's very little drop off in terms of his play, and I'd actually like to combine one of my takes with one of Thorin's takes, because I think Thorin kind of posited the idea a while back that the hardest jump up from tier 2 to tier 1 is for oppers, and I feel like in many ways I hone that take in saying that it's just that for the first 3 months all of their aggressive peaks will work because nobody knows they're going to do them, but like we're seeing with Ultimate, for example, once they start to study them, then that's when they really do fall off. It is a pressure thing too, which Thorin referenced when he made that take quite some time ago. But I also think that it's just that the support staffs of tier 1 teams, if you're a one-trick pony in terms of your play style and what you like to do every round, you are also going to be figured out. And there is no role that it is more punishing for you to be figured out in than the opera role. So yeah, I do feel, overall, I mean, I get your take, but I just feel like it's always just like, yeah, I think all of these guys would actually make a splash in tier 1. It's almost just how long that splash and that wave lasts.
Sure. I mean, I will say on the overall point, I agree. Like, I actually do think part of it's to do with how different the scene is now, though. Like, back in the day, what's weird is there's a certain type of player back in the day that actually would have had a much easier career, but now has a harder one because of what we've done with tier 2 and all the people gambling on buyouts. But that's like basically the kind of player where the way you used to force your way into top teams in the past was you just had to literally play them at LANs. Like, if you went to the LAN in a smaller team, in some like Ukrainian LAN or Swedish LAN or Danish LAN or whatever, and you had like an upset, or sometimes you didn't have to upset them if you just played well against them, basically, and they saw like, right, this guy's LAN proven, he's done it against us, and obviously he's on the rise. That type of player actually, unfortunately, is the kind of player that it seems now this system slows down a little bit, because basically the joke is, because we've developed tier 2, even low tier 1 and tier 2 teams, they will be the ones trying at the moment as a way to min-max their economy. They will actually try to scout that guy before he can go straight to Vitality or Astralis or some top team, which back in the day, if he came along and he was the shit, he would have. But the upside is, as much as that might be frustrating sometimes, man, I think of players like Wrinkle in NIP. Like, if people don't know, I'm not even joking, that is a player where the rumours already were going behind the scenes that he's a good player before he got to NIP. It's just, I'm not even trolling. NIP would just for real something mad like 2 months before the other top teams. Like, literally right after that. It's not even just because he played in NIP, guys. It's just because that's when other people sort of caught up to the idea this guy was a prospect. All of a sudden, I heard there was loads of teams, maybe even Team Liquid, the aforementioned team, maybe even they were in the mix, but it was too late at that point. And once an IP had you, you can imagine they're not going to instantly sell you for cheap. They're going to sell you for a big markup, or they're going to use you. So that sort of player maybe did get like halted from going to the top of the scene. But the difference is, I actually totally agree on the other one. There are loads of players, especially because we've got such an open international scene now where everyone speaks English in these teams, where you've actually nailed it there, Ne0kai. It's not just that people have like amazing eye tests. Like, you can find people who are brilliant thinkers and coaches who can break a demo down. But what you referenced reference there is actually another little hidden revolution. I know we're going to talk this episode in someone else's point about the whole stats thing on HLTV, but more than just stats itself, what people don't realise, basically, Maui, is there actually is some sort of an essence to, I don't know beyond this game in Counter-Strike and League of Legends, but there's certain esports games that essentially I can tell you, it's not a joke. People have almost like scientifically solved it. Now, when I say solved, obviously the analyzer, as they call it in League of Legends, or the algorithm, whatever you're going to call it, whether it's a site or an actual tool that analyzes the game or the VOD or the replay or whatever. Look, obviously it can't really do what we do with our eye test and tell you like why someone played in a beautiful way or their decision was genius. But basically, I can tell you in League of Legends, someone in Europe also, quite literally for similar reasons, just to avoid buyouts and things, did actually make a tool, it's called an analyzer, where basically what they did was they're able to put like they take sort of like ladder data. So they not only take your game, the player you're analyzing, but they take like everyone on like the EU West ladder in League of Legends, for example. And what they're able to show you is based on the role he plays, how everyone in that whole region, they can sort of tell you no matter what level the game took place, like sort of how much did he sort of maximize his performance? Like, would he be like, in the top like 1% of people who play that role, for example? And what they found when they did this analysis, this is why I say they've figured out, solved something. What they've solved, as far as I can tell, is they've actually sort of scientifically found a way you can like differentiate people mechanically. I don't think they can tell you sort of the bigger picture things that obviously a coach would have to look at or see someone has the nous for the game. But yeah, I have actually heard, because I put it this way, I've heard some of the names that like they were able to discover with this, and I'll give you one. I've had this on a show on LFN, on a League of Legends show. One of the players, unironically, this tool actually analysed and scouted out 2 or 3 years ago was literally the guy who was in T1, the fucking Korean team that's about to like win worlds for, like back to back. Like, and the joke is, this is a real story. It was a European guy who scouted him, and he said to his team, which was an LEC team, like, I can sign this like Korean that no one knows yet, but he's shit hot, I promise. Like the tool tells us basically he's going to be like one of the best in the world. And the joke is, this is real. 2 of his players on his team that were European players just were like, who's this fucking random Korean guy? Just get in, like, and then they got in like some like good, but like, like established player that they already knew was something that was like a mate of theirs or something. And the joke obviously is, in the meantime, he just went to like the top of the entire world of League of Legends, probably one of the most competitive games in the world. So I've also heard a similar thing, Neo, which is I've heard people have found something quite similar in CS, because you can imagine, like, there are certain moves that you make. This is why, by the way, people could tell people like MonteCristo and Duncan were going to be cracked. There are certain moves you make that, like, it's not just because you play in tier 3 that you make getting those kills. You have just some ability that goes above and beyond. It's why you can even see in football, like, people can scout someone when they're 16 years old and know they're going to be shit hot, even if you put them straight in the pros. The obvious problem with this topic to me is only the initial framing when you say like superstar players. Because I will say, in general, I'm actually quite in favour of the point. I do agree with it. I think there's way more talent out there, especially now that we're going to do English language teams and we're not gate-kept by like culture or country, etc. If that's not a factor, obviously there's a bazillion talents. By the way, that's why people like the Flamers guy are perfect. People would only know him in the past if he was on like the 4th best Russian team and then he beat the 3rd best, This way he was able to come up through just pure tier 1 online play, basically, because Ne0kai was like a notorious, like really good online cop merchant. And then he was the clear guy, by the way, that if you looked at your eye test, he was really good. And he's super young as well. So, no, if people don't know, the whole point, as I talked about in that interview I did with Ash, is his whole like rebuild for Game of Legion this time around was to gamble on all the young talents. It's the idea that this person has like the base fundamental like skill level that could be at the top level. But this is the key point to make. I do think the mistake, though, is I think people even did this with people like Donk, is you look at the guy having insane skill and you imagine that's like 99% of being a player. The analogy would be like in football, if someone's a really young striker. Look, they might be able to score goals, but there might be so much also about the game they don't understand, like how to play when it's the end of a big game, and or it's in Europe, or it's fucking, you have to do link-up play, or you have to defend as a striker sometimes. There's obviously a relevance to the game. So I will just say the one thing I do worry about, though, is I think the other reason why we've had a big turnover of talents is I think some of the other teams see the success of like a MOUZ, an ENCE, a fucking Game of Legion. I think some of them do naively think like, you can just take like talent and then just chuck him in, and his stats say he's as good as Ne0kai, so he is Ne0kai. And it's like, no, whoa. You got to still develop him to be Ne0kai in that scenario, though. Like, I even think you can think of some of the top players now, like people like Spinks, bro, because he's like a great example of that Flames fucking endpoint, like pipeline of talent, right? I think some of those players, look at how long Flames was in OG, and I can tell you, when he was in OG early, none of these big teams were knocking. They weren't all watch and go with the eye test. They were like, people were like, he has really good skills, but who knows? He's a bit up and down, I do think for people like Spinks and Flames, it's an example, though, that you have to still have like I'd say probably like a great coach or IGL to like bring them into the scene, though. You can't just chuck them on the scene and really expect them to just be the best player, So I think it's a pretty good point, though. Right, Maui.
Yeah.
Hey, go on. You can come back. We can do some more. Go on.
Like I said, the only thing I really worry about is I think some teams are coming into this idea now where, like, you know, MOUZ done it super well, and I think a few teams have done it in, like, Game Legion is a great example. They brought in young players and done really well. I think there's some teams who are coming in and doing it really wrong, and they're doing it for purely profit maximizing regions.
Sure.
Thinking like, right, his stats are good. Maybe he's getting a little bit of popularity online. Let me just buy him and just slap a massive buyout on him and see if I can just print some money. And I think like Nipper, a good example of that, like with Wrinkle, he got brought in, understandably on kind of a relatively low rate. I think it was a little bit better than what he was, but he was cooking on bait, right? They back-to-back RMRs. They just got really unfortunate. I think, if I'm right in saying, I need to double check it, but I did both of the RMRs for them, and they have like the worst record, like maybe ever, when it comes to games that qualify to the major. They're like 0-6 or something like that.
One of them,
like,
they lost to that Game Legion team, but it was the real one, yeah. It's not a 2-2 game, right?
Exactly. They go 2-0 up and then just lose all the best of three. So they've been really unfortunate when it comes to that. But Wrinkle every single time farmed. That caused them like slapping Fnatic when there was like a really good point for Fnatic side. And Wrinkle just farmed. But yeah, I think a lot of teams are coming in now and are starting to see the success of like, you know, a MOUZ or a Gamer Legion. Or I guess even like an ENCE is another really good one because they're always like one of the profitable teams. And they're thinking, oh, this is a way we can like balance the books a little bit and make some money and just sell these guys. And I don't think they realize that unless they actually properly develop them and figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are, get a good system around them, they're just going to completely kill these players, and they're going to be, you know, out of the scene and struggling to find teams because they've seen like, oh, you went up in towards quote unquote tier 1 or tier 1.5 and you didn't play that well. But I think a lot of it will come down to it being not their fault and not getting the right kind of system around them. So that's the only thing that I worry about, and I think that might happen a little bit more as we kind of go on and this data thing becomes quite a big kind of conversation point in a way, or players will farm FBL and they think, oh, they should be good in the server, and then they're just not given enough time or enough kind of support.
Okay, Maui, where are we going? By the way, remember, we are recording this when Maui is on the other side of the world. So there's a reason why his like energy level is like, he's on like charging mode right now. Okay, what is your point, Maui?
Yeah. I mean, it's midnight.
It's all good.
For me
It's
right
all
now
good.
in Singapore. So yeah, and I had a call time like over 12 hours ago. So yeah, I mean,
Okay. We appreciate
my
being
good
here.
point. Yeah, no, my good point is that FaZe have not only lost their win streak to MOUZ, which happened at IEM Rio, but now that MOUZ has beaten them twice. And I'm not just saying this because it's a feel-good story that MOUZ snapped this big losing streak, but I really want to emphasize this because with the rumors that are circulating behind the scenes about where will the MOUZ pieces land, like the sweepstakes in the transfer window after the major is probably going to be about who is going to win the Impact lottery or perhaps the Exertion lottery. I am just simply glad that FaZe, a team that has notoriously picked apart MOUZ again and again over the years, is now being defeated by them, because I feel like MOUZ need to convince themselves that they are worthy of sticking together as a five-man unit. And I'm glad that despite the fact that they've had a pretty, I'd say actually pretty underachieving last 6 months, with the exception of ESL Pro League, which actually might have been before 6 months ago, they have really, they're starting to pick up some steam with the grand finals in Rio, and also just beating their essentially big brothers in FaZe twice now, which I just feel like there's so much talk about the roster and it hasn't run its course, but it's truly one of the few times where I think, despite the time that they've had as a five-man unit, I really just do think that they need a little bit more time. I do believe that they can actually find success if they just work through the issues that they were having, because the slight hiccup in chemistry where they lost the honeymoon period, where it felt like there was a little bit of turmoil between individuals via even what they revealed in some ESL Pro League comms last season, that feels like it's actually being course corrected at this point, and Brolin seems to be contributing more as an individual and a moral leader at this point, which I never thought I would say, by the way. I thought Brolin was always going to be just kind of that stoic Swedish guy that doesn't really fuck with people that just get too excited. But now he's actually seemingly contributing to that sort of positive atmosphere. And I just think that overall, it's so important that MOUZ won this series. I don't really say anything about them winning the tournament, but beating FaZe twice in a row may make one of their players actually reconsider if any offers from FaZe have been coming their way.
What do you think, Neil?
Yeah, honestly, with me, one of the points I really want to kind of focus on is I really hope that they have seen now with the kind of the consistent, or I guess consecutive wins over FaZe, that actually, like, when with how the scene is at the top level, bar Na'Vi, I actually think they're like the second closest team to being like era worthy in a way. And like their year, the last 6 months may be a little underwhelming, but like, I mean, G2 all over the place, and like, you know, we can go for ends about how they're in a rough spot. If Vitality are constantly looking to replace players, and they've had rumors about players dropping, MOUZ is the only one for me where it's for like, if this five actually stick together, I actually really would want to. I mean, that's the hope for me. As much as everyone is vying for where's Yimfat going to go, or like, are they going to replace Torji, or this, that, and the other, I actually really hope they do stick together. They're like one of the few sides that I've enjoyed seeing them go. I mean, I cast them all the way back in the Academy League days, all the way in towards now, bar Brolin. I had a lot of reservations about when Brolin was brought after his sort of stand-in stint. I didn't know whether that was the right choice, but as we saw kind of in the series today, really like what I saw out from him. Very, very solid, very confident it seems now as well. I'd love to see this MOUZ side actually stick together because, you know, I feel like the only side for me that actually feel like they can consistently test Na'Vi. I don't really see any side at the moment. Like, FaZe got all their problems. Spirit are so up and down. Vitality, I mean, they're all over the place as well. And G2 are an absolute mess. So, like, I feel like they're the only side who can actually contest Na'Vi currently in a more consistent basis at the moment. And the hope is that they do sit together and that they can, because it makes that scene at the top level very interesting, rather than kind of, for me, where it's like, at the moment, going into a lot of tournaments, Na'Vi always is this clear favorite. If MOUZ fix a few of these issues, and just like a few of them in terms of consistency, I actually think it does at least create a bit of a debate there.
I actually think this is an example of where people are going to get it slightly wrong with the analysis, because what's funny is if they look up, obviously the joke is, another reason they beat FaZe now, Maui, is because obviously FaZe is way worse now. But I actually think that is an underrated aspect, which is, that's not actually always how it works. Like, I'll give you the obvious old school example. If people can remember, the core that became Astralis of Device and Dupree and Zipnix and those guys, they were already better than the NIPs and the VPs of the world for years before they could actually consistently beat them in the big game. Because unfortunately, I think one of the reasons why people become like serial chokers, or they lose to the same opponent over and over and over again, is because eventually it's not even like the individual game or something that like is specifically happening. It's like you get like a psychic wound whether you go into the next match almost like the joke is, it's like you go into the next series down one map before you even play the first map, because you just like, I can tell you back in the day when Team Liquid used to play Astralis and they had the exact same map pool, well, they know, fuck, they're probably winning their first map, and then shit, we pick a map they like, we might just get 2-0'd. Like, you can't go into a series thinking it could be 2-0. So unfortunately, I think MOUZ had lost every type of series to that FaZe team that was like the number one team. That I think they and also, let's be real, because there was a very real thing where literally in their team they'd had like fucking Carrigan, what's his name, Rops and then Frozen all come from MOUZ to FaZe. Like, we all used to make that joke back in the day that like, but MOUZ is the poor man's FaZe clan. But I think MOUZ themselves sort of believe that. I think on some level they do sort of think of it as like MOUZ is like the finishing school, and then once you graduate, you go to FaZe clan or G2 or Vitality. And I actually think that's like an underrated aspect. So I've pointed this out on the show in the past, that I actually told this to Exertion, who's one of the players in MOUZ I sometimes talk to, during Cologne. Once he made the playoffs, I sent him a DM where I basically just said, I've told this story before, the gist was, whereas everyone else is going to say like, oh, you guys, like, you could do it, or like, oh, you know, if you guys make top in the finals, that's good. I said, like, if your team's already good enough now, mate, you should actually just win now. Like, if you can win this tournament, just go and win it now. There's not like an anime where you have to like power up to that level or wait to like beat 3 bosses before you get in. The great thing about CS is if you're actually good enough, you can just go straight to the final level and just beat the boss immediately. It's like a speed run basically. And the thing with MOUZ, I agree with you, Neo, they have everything. The only thing they don't have basically is like the raw experience, which seems to be the thing that fucks them up at the moment. Like, to me, they're actually one of the teams where, on the one hand, they're sort of confusing that they were so bad for that like month or so before Rio. But on the other hand, when I think about the fact that they're incredibly inexperienced as a team and there's not a single player, I mean, remember, they're treating Brolan like the veteran, but because of the whole 2 years of COVID, to me, Brolan's like barely come out of being almost like a rookie type figure, where I don't think of him as like an established player that's like, you know, the guy who's going to be the rock, and like you say, like MOUZ said, he's not going to be like an emotional leader you don't expect. You actually think he used to be the guy who was like the 18-year-old 5 minutes ago. So that's a tough one itself. So that's why on one level it wasn't that surprising they had that downturn. Because if you ever saw when they were losing those games, there wasn't even a player you could hate on, like when people hated on Immer in Na'Vi or something like, oh, you know, fucking Snacks in G2. Everyone was doing shit. I'm not even joking, guys. Here's how you know when they were fucked, was when even Yimfat was just having games. He was just crap, mate. You were like, it's the whole thing. It's like the fucking one bad apple just ruined the whole thing. Why is the whole team shit? So to me, whenever they went went through. That was like some dark night of the soul, though, and they seem to have come out the other side. Like, first of all, they looked amazing in Rio. Like, you know, the funniest thing of all is because they lost that series to fucking Furia early on. Everyone obviously kicking flame. They're like, they're still shit. And the joke is that was like probably the best event Furia's ever played with that lineup. Like, after that, Furia actually looked way better, didn't they? And also, they got their revenge anyway. And I actually think, by the way, that was like, for me, like, that was like a character statement that specific match. If you were going to be the big chokers, you have the biggest excuse ever to lose on stage in a crowd that only cares about one team. It's your rivals, and they've got the most decorated player, like, in the modern day ever from Brazil. Like, obviously, everyone's going to pull against you. But they actually came through that game awesome. If you watch that one, they actually did really well. Looked like they didn't get broken at all. And in my opinion, I actually also agree on the thing in the final, which is, if you look at it, this is why, if you're MOUZ, I do think this season is it. Like, if this one doesn't happen, I actually think you even should break apart and go to other teams. Because if you're not going to win now, I mean, one of my points later is I think there's going to be a whole bunch of roster moves after this major in the top 10, basically. I think like half the top 10 at least is going to make up one or two changes. So I think right now is the best possible time for MOUZ to actually be number one. Because I agree with you. I think if you look at their roster, the joke is, because none of us even knew some of the Na'Vi players were this good, I actually think they have a top two roster. In my opinion, the two best rosters on paper is Vitality and MOUZ. Like, yeah, Na'Vi functionally has proven to be better. Maybe once upon a time FaZe was very highly ranked. If you look at the others, like, I think a lot of people look at G2, it's still scuffed. They've got skilled players, but it's a scuffed lineup. You go look at some of the other teams, by the way. I think, if anything, hasn't Spirit sort of failed to show that their lineup can always perform, etc.? So I think they've got everything going for them except experience, basically. So I think, yeah, I absolutely think it's a good thing they beat FaZe, because for me now, to bring it all the way back, in theory, there is nobody, if you're MOUZ, you can't beat. Maybe you could say Na'Vi because they haven't really done it in the last matches, but if you look how close some of those games are, they absolutely could beat Na'Vi. Like, if I was MOUZ for real, I would just be telling them right now, no matter what happens between today and the first day of the major, like, we could literally win this major. Like, why can't we, is the question at this point in time. So, no, I'm with you. I think that's a very good sign in general. I can say I don't think there's any reason, except for they haven't had the experience of doing it, that they can't win the major, mate. I think it's totally legit. Right, my point is going to be an incredibly self-indulgent one, but I actually have a serious point to make about this, which is all I've put down for my good point is that Kassad has actually been redeemed. And the reason why I say that is because people don't realise the difference between like having a persona or joking about certain things. Now, I don't think people will get it. Like, it had gone so egregiously far, the criticism of Kassad, it was fucking insane, mate. And half of it I can tell you, because I know fans. I've sort of tried to study fans. My joke here, Ne0kai, I'll obviously be careful about, I'll just say all fans in general, because I've got in trouble in the past. I'm like Jane Goodall, studying the apes. Oh, look at that. Look at the way they scratch and groom each other. But enough about HLTV org users. Right? I'm like that guy. So I don't just look at fans saying, I try to sort of think, what is their theory of mind? Why they think this? I can tell you, I think, literally, I'm not exaggerating, 80% of the hate towards Kassad was just people who were mad that he criticised Huxley. And so their logic was like, right, well, you said something mean about Huxley, so I'm just going to be mean about you. And so it became where, like, you would think for real, like, he was the one who made fucking Falcons. Like, the way people talked about fucking Bleed esports with a bunch of, like, low tier 1, like, high tier 2 players, you would think he had the Falcons roster and budget and had, like, got, like, Nico as well in the lineup. Like, it's actually bonkers. Think about this, guys. On the day we are filming this, G2, who we were all told we have to apologise to Snacks, got 13-0'd on LAN, and I've never seen them get anywhere approaching the level of hate Kassad was getting for, like, bad tier 2 online results. It's like, it was so egregious. And so the reason why I say I think he is redeemed is because I actually think, look, it's fine if you think he was a bad GM or coach, or you didn't think Bleed was a good squad, or you did. That's all fine. That's all part and parcel of being in the scene and having opinions and being a fan. But I do think people for real decided for some bizarre reason, like it's a movie, that Kassad's a genuinely bad human being and that he, like, deserves all these things that are happening to him. Whereas I actually think not just, like, some of the things they've heard about, like, now Bleed the organisation, but also now that you've seen that he has gone above and beyond for his players in a way where I can tell you right now, almost no other coach in the whole scene would do that. In fact, I'll even say Richard basically told this to him his face on 4 Horsemen. Look, no coach should do what he did. He basically treated those players like they were his actual family and actually forewent his own money to, like, buy boot camps, pay them off. Like, I actually do think that is too far. But what it shows is what insane character this person has. And so one thing I actually think it has redeemed, so I put it as my good point, is you can think whatever you like, I told you, about any CS related things. But what it showed is, Kassad, it's the opposite, you idiots. You might not like him, whether as a thinker or a coach. He is unironically one of the best people actually in, like, European Counter-Strike. I'm not even trolling. As you've seen. And spoiler, the reason why you should have known that already, guys, is he's not some, like, kingpin who, like, keeps everyone, like, can't give give their opinion. I've never heard a single player, I'm not even joking, even privately didn't like this guy. I've never heard of it ever. Not a single player who played for him, I've never heard anyone complain about him. So what I think you've actually got a sense for, and it's rare this happens, a lot of people, if they're portrayed as a villain, you'll never get this moment where you get to sort of show the real side of yourself. But I feel like people have gotten a little insight into what he's actually like as a person, partly because of just all the things he didn't have in his control. That hopefully now, to somebody who has redeemed him. And if you want to hate him for CS reasons, go for it. But the idea of people like make it like he's a douchebag as a person, it's the opposite, you idiots. He's actually a really stand-up person, as you saw from some of the things about Blade.
Yeah, like, so I've never met him, right? So I have like no of my own opinions in that sense. But what I will say is I know people who do know him very well, who have obviously kind of played with him. I think it's pretty obvious to understand who that would be. And they spoke like the world of him, saying like he had the nicest bloke ever, always have got their back. But I think for me, the insane thing with kassad, what you saw kind of online was he got hate, especially online, for doing the one thing that I've always wanted people to do, which is like be open. Like,
oh, sure.
I hate that,
yes.
like in esports these days, you can't talk about like contracts,
sure,
or how much a player's getting paid, or how much a team's earning. Which is like, you know, I come from a football background. That's sort of what I've always been used to, and it's been a very good measurement of judgment, right? But then like you've got like him talking about like their contracts, either their lengths, how much they're getting paid, this, that, the other, or like another classic one was the buyout fees as well, right? When they were talking about that, and he was getting shit on for being open, which is like he had no, you know, he didn't need to do that, but it was like such a good thing that he did. So I agree. I think a lot of people, especially like in his comments, they used him as sort of they used his own openness as sort of like a way to kind of dig on him when he wouldn't play well, when he had no reason to kind of talk about that. He was actually just trying to be a good person. So I always think like you could see it, and especially then the same people, and there was a couple, I even like bookmarked a couple of them like a while back, especially when I started hearing that Bleed were getting, there was like a little bit of weirdness going on, because I heard it via the Valorant team, that there was like people weren't getting paid there, and I was like, I don't know, this might happen to the CS team too. So I bookmarked a few like people who were basically like trying to shit on kassad, like, you know, random no-namers on Twitter or whatever, and the same people were apologizing when he came out about saying like, Bleed don't paid us, and then he was like, I hate Bleed, this is a horrible thing. And it's just like, for me, that was just like the ultimate thing where it's like, because I was, you know, he's been open here in both senses, both when they're on the op talking about the money we've got to spend on players and this, that, and the other, and then on the, you know, the other side when obviously things went bad and they got completely fucked over by the org, and people just had that's the one thing I hate. And I hate the feeling that it feels like it's going to stop people doing that in the future. Like, I love when people have been open. I mean, again, we kind of saw the same thing happen, I think, unfortunately, with the C9 Colossus, right? When they all came forward with the contracts, how much they were getting, and it got utilized against them. And I think for kassad, you know, he was trying to like surf through the absolute shitstorm that is tier 2. I mean, he's even spoken about it recently. I think match fixing is at like an all-time high. Cheaters are rampant. Every open qualifier, especially the major open qualifiers, are just absolutely full of them as well. It's like a near impossible task to try and kind of get any sort of consistency coming through. And I think he did a fairly decent job with players who weren't, you know, from my eyes, I would say like top tier 1 level, or kind of players who could at that level. They're all kind of prospects in that sense. So yeah, I think I agree with you. I think, you know, I've never met the guy, but what you can see from at least what's happened to him now, you know, paid out of the pocket. I know very, very few people who do that ever. I mean, most people that I've met, especially I guess kind of coming up through the tier 2, they would, you know, it's yourself first before others every single step of the way. You know, any sort of backstabbing or anything is like unbelievably common. So yeah, that's insane. Like, in a way, like, you know, mad respects in terms of like paying for the boot camps out of his pocket, doing it all, and with the notion that like I actually might never get paid back for this, but I believe in the project. And then the second they leave the org, unpaid, make a grand final first tournament, right? And obviously it seems like they're all going their separate ways, but that is credit to kind of his belief in the players, right? He always backed them all the way to the very end. And I think as well, he was kind of sort of happy to sort of take the brunt of the blame so that the players didn't take the brunt of the blame, right? He was kind of happy to be the slightly more public facing figure. He would, if they would lose, he would be the first person they would go towards. But I think he understood that, like, I can take it, but I don't know if some of these kind of tier 2, tier 1.5 players can, and I don't want to affect their confidence. So mad respect to him. I feel like what he's done for this side, I mean, they'll always try to speak so highly of him for it.
If people don't know, by the way, because obviously the problem is that LAN literally overlapped with the LAN we were working in. Obviously, if people were going to watch something like Tier 2, they'll probably watch our broadcast. If people don't know, like, fucking, like, Unpaid finished ahead of fucking Fnatic at that LAN, guys. Like, an actual real team. Like, not like nobodies. And Sangal, there's a whole bunch of, like, real squads at that LAN. What do you think, Maui, on this topic? Obviously, again, disclaimer, we are incredibly biased. We do a show with kassad, where we at least, well, the joke is we pretend not to like him, but we secretly do like him, you idiots. Of course, he's brilliant, isn't he?
Yeah. I mean, kassad is just one of the most loyal people in esports, and he's probably even loyal to a fault. given the fact that he hired NECSA to his team.
Okay, there you go.
And
there you go.
I do agree. I agree with Richard in the.
So you say that like him picking up Nexa is like when Jesus was like associated with like prostitutes and tax collectors in the Bible. So I'm like, look, he can even see the most lowly amongst us, the inner light within them. Like, so Nexa used to be like an actual like G2 player like a few months ago, guys. Like he was winning tournaments and everything.
That was a joke with hindsight. I thought the move was actually a shrewd.
No, it did at the time look good. It did. True.
Yeah. So no, I watched the whole Four Horsemen that you guys did with with Richard and Monty and Kassad, and I just feel like on top of the fact that he's loyal, it's also the fact that he'll just try to make it work no matter what. And I feel like Kassad at this point, with what happened with the Cloud9 Colossus sort of unfolding in the way that it did, where he dropped out of it pretty early, and Extremum not really achieving anything during a pretty weird online era. It was pretty clear that what Kassad's actions meant were that he's had some pretty bad failures recently, but he really wanted to make this work. And Richard said he probably shouldn't have paid for anything by himself, but like, if I'm on failure number 3 consecutively, I'm gonna probably try to make it work to my own detriment, even if it means that I'm gonna go through my own personal funds to try to make that happen. And so I totally empathize with what he was doing. I obviously, in an ideal world, it's not how you go about things, but I almost, in a way, just seeing the whole picture of who Kassad is as a person, it's not. It's not pretty. It's not been, just everything getting handed to him, and he's trying to make these moves. He's trying to make these deals happen. The Bleed organization was clearly non-responsive. The people just dipped out and left, essentially. You know what? In fact, I should go find them. I'll find them. I'm in Singapore right now. I'll take some of my time off and actually just go right to their house. No, that's not real. That's not a threat. Don't actually sue me for that. Nothing's gonna happen. If anything mysteriously happens to the people that are associated with Bleed, I am not responsible whatsoever. I am on broadcast. That is my alibi. No. So beyond that, though, what Ne0kai said on top of that, I feel like another thing is that Kassad's openness in the space, which is kind of like it was actually like, despite the fact they didn't work together very long, I think it's now proven to be one thing that Henry and Kassad agreed on, that they wanted to be open about contracts, salaries, and if that would further. I've harped on this so many times, pretty much ever. I think even since we started maybe doing podcasts around that time or whatever. Just if that had become the norm for teams to disclose what their contract length were and the amount, we would have just furthered ourselves so drastically in this space. But unfortunately, I don't think that's coming anytime soon. With the death of partner teams and with Valve not really forcing any kind of there's no prerogative. There's no reason that you would actually go for that right now, because if they did, teams like Vitality, Falcons, and Heroic would just get flamed tenfold. But on the flip side, I actually think it would be kind of nice for teams like the Mongols and Eternal Fire, who are paying way less than those kinds of teams and actually achieving pretty moderate success. And so it would scale our critique. It would change the face of discussion in this space entirely. And Kassad's a guy that's been very, very open about all that stuff. And so I think he has the right ideas in place. But unfortunately, things didn't work out for him here. And I'm glad that everything has, in a weird way, this could be a blessing in disguise, because I think it's a big character redemption for Kassad in the eyes of the public. I don't know what that's going to do for him necessarily, because the public doesn't pay you, generally speaking, unless, but like, it's still, if there's any guy that deserves another chance, I think Kassad has proven that he puts blood, sweat, tears, and his own personal finance into the ring on these things.
By the way, for people who aren't aware, I'm pretty sure, because I'm sure I mentioned this on my stream video I did where I defended him against a bunch of haters months before even this Bleed thing came out. I'm pretty sure there was a story a few years back where it actually was Kassad who turned down Bleed, G2 to become their coach, believe it or not, which is why actually it's so irritating that people don't know that, because then when he criticised Huxley and the G2 management, people did that thing like, you're just jealous, you wish it was you. It's like, the reason, as far as I know, by the way, guys, that he turned down deals like that is actually because, as Maui said, if you look at some of the gigs he had in the past, I actually think Kassad's whole thing now is he doesn't just want to be a coach, because one of the worst things about being a coach, I can tell you, is sometimes you don't even get to pick any of the players, as in you get a choice in the same way as someone in like a prison cafeteria gets a choice. You get a choice of whatever's in front of you. You get to pick on those three things. You don't get to just go, I'd like a film. So imagine in that analogy, if you were eating something in the prison cafeteria and then someone came in like some fucking Gordon Ramsay guy, like, well, what's going on here? That's a bit overcooked. Say, yeah, I have no choice, you idiot. Like, what am I working? So as far as I know, the whole reason he took the Bleed gig is he wants to do a gig where it's essentially like he's like dual GM and coach as well. So he actually gets to like pick the players, do the deals, so he also knows it makes sense, and then you coach the players in the game. So the reason I bring that up is I don't imagine personally that he's going to then, no matter what his reps like what Maui's saying, I don't think he's really going to now leap up and be like FaZe Clan's general manager and coach. But I do think he can get another gig like this. And I think actually, now that people know both some of the things in his own life, if people don't know, like a few months ago, his dad died, and the next day his like son was born or something, and he was like at a bloody event in like the other side of the world. I think he was in like bloody India while all this happened. So if you know that, and that they weren't getting paid, and then as you consider, like Ne0kai said, before it went to shit, it was actually looking pretty promising in Bleed for basically from the beginning of the project for like what 4 or 5 months or something. So like if people don't know, there was even a period online where they had their own little run where they were winning like I'm going to say like 13 out of 16 best of X's or whatever, you know. They had their own little period when they were cooking. So I think he has to some degree shown what he can do. You can obviously take or leave the results, but I think he will get another opportunity. Obviously now they're all available to go and play elsewhere and get paid and actually have real salaries. So I just hope actually, because the last thing I'll say is I think the other reason people hated on him is a very human one. I understand it, which is if you come out and you sort of say, hey, things are broken in the scene and it shouldn't be done this way, it should be done another way, then there is a sort of person who's very young, who themselves has never done anything, who will go, oh, so you can do it better than that. It's like, basically, the example is, it's why people, when he had his Bleed roster, unironically tried to suggest he should have the same results as Huxley with G2's roster. Because in their brain's going, but you're saying you could do better than Huxley. And it's like, yeah, but he hasn't got Huxley's players. Well then, but do better than Huxley then. I think they were doing that with the team element. What they sort of thought was, if he thinks he knows better than G2 and Vital, then why doesn't his team get to that level? Which is just unfortunately the folly of youth. Like, he didn't have those players, boys. Like, I would say in sports like football, there are a million examples of players and coaches who were godlike when they're at like the lower level, and they never had their chance with the Man City lineup. They were just working with some like Fulham lineup or Norwich or something, you know, and they were just getting like min-max like crazy. So if you're just looking in an absolute sense, yeah, they're never going to win the league, are they? But the point is, they probably came like 12th sometimes when like they shouldn't even be in the Premier League in that analogy. Like, that's actually inconceivable. They were even 12th. So I'd say there's a lot of that goes there. Right. Now, speaking of people who've maybe shown their arse and they need to put on a new look, this is a hell of a segue. What about MeUndies? That's an underwear brand, isn't it? So, yeah, listen, if you sponsor my shows, I do them my way, Mo. You have to understand that. So, MeUndies has a cot for every guy's butt. I'm literally reading copy right now, but that's okay. Don't worry about that. Ne0kai are a professional. They have over 10 different styles, ranging from boxer briefs that I used to make fun of those, you Americans. I have to say, you know what? You win. I used to wear the old-fashioned underwear. Actually, boxer briefs are the best ones. I agree with it. They then say to jock straps, listen, personally, I don't endorse a jock strap, but someone out there might be old school, to their special pouch underwear that has a thing called ball caddy. Because basically, there's a thing, only Americans would come up with these concepts, but there's actually a term apparently when you not to get caught on that part of like the weird part of the slit at the front. That's apparently called bat winging, and they actually have the technology. We have the technology, sir. They have the technology to avoid that now. That's actually what their underwear is very good for. So as a result, you don't have to be back in the old days with the old, let's say unsophisticated problems. Now, MeUndies is not just about underwear. They also have like a lounge collection, which has like joggers, hoodies, onesies. They actually have loads of apparel. It's not just underwear. Also, they have like a signature fabric that is especially supposed to be really comfortable. It's breathable, stretchy, ideal for all weather. All day, you can just wear it wherever you want. It's responsibly sourced, so if you care about that sorts of things, they actually do vet like who their partners are and who works for them, etc., and how the materials get there. And also, if you're not happy with your first pair of underwear, then it's on MeUndies. They will cover it. So be your most comfortable self this fall with MeUndies. Get 20% off your first order plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/snake. That is the code SNAKE. That's MeUndies.com/snake for 20% off plus free shipping. MeUndies, comfort from the inside out. Right. Thank you to MeUndies for sponsoring the episode, and thanks to everyone who purchases some or just considers it. Right. Now we go into the bad points. So, Neo, what is your bad point? What's interesting is, I'll warn you already, Maui doesn't know what this point is, but I actually think this could be a spicy topic. So, come on then, what's your bad point? What are you coming with here?
So my one, it's maybe slightly old news, but I did want to bring it back because I think this is a pretty good conversation point. So my bad point is, I think that getting rid of the RMRs was a bad thing. I'm personally anti this new system where it's like an extra 4 days and an extra Swiss stage and no RMR. Now there's a few like kind of like home reasons in the sense of like, I used to love the fairy tale runs that we see. I know people would, the counter argument would always be kind of like, oh, it would make the major like lesser, there'd be like worse teams.
Watered down or whatever, yeah, sure.
Yeah, a bit of a good example where we kind of, I think it's like 4 of the top 8 teams, like tier 2 teams, quote unquote. But I used to love that because, you know, I just think like it was literally life changing for a lot of these players, and the euphoria of when teams would qualify was insane. I mean, I was there when Into the Breach qualified first, in, you know, UK majority major team. I was sitting with them when they got the legend stage as well. We were like in the green room waiting, and they watched B&E beat FaZe, so that means they got the legend stage. Like the most insane thing. That was like ridiculous. These are kind of guys I grew up with as well, so that euphoria, a bit personal in that sense, and obviously biased there, but I used to love that. Having done quite a few RMRs as well, I could see sort of what it meant to a lot of the players when they would qualify, especially for the first time. Or a good example was like when Saw made their first major, because the no scope onto Jane that legged him and that lost them the previous one.
Where they like almost qualified once and then they had the similar thing happen the next time, right? Where they just
like,
made it through.
Box Inferno, it's the Dodo legs Jane, and then they don't make it because they lost an OT. That kind of thing, right? So when they made it the set, you know, a year later or whatever, those sort of, you know, Euphoria, these are players who've been around for like 8 years, whatever, and never been even close to a major. Now they'd finally made it. So I always love the RMRs for that. But I think as well, it comes down to other things for me. So like, I think the first one was like, it was one of the only kind of true open circuits that we had like in CS, especially, you know, when we've had this era of the partner leagues. I know they're sort of, the partner leagues are going in quotation marks in towards next year, but it still seems that like next year the majority of tournaments are not actually going to an open circuit regardless. They're just inviting our Valve rankings, so it's sort of still bottlenecks towards this top level, and there's no real ability for kind of teams that are sort of out of the woodwork or tier 2 teams who would never be in consideration to really even make it. Another good one from last year, MOUZ. No one had really heard of them. You know, if you hadn't worked tier 2, we sort of knew of them, but even in tier 2 they weren't like insane. They were pretty good, but I didn't think they were going to be a major level team. So, you know, yeah, teams like MOUZ, but I think as well, without the RMR, this is a lot of like financial uncertainty for organizations, and I think it's probably at an all-time high. And we've seen a lot of actually pretty good orgs who have been really good, either proving ground to players or kind of this talent coming through or actually closing. ICLA is a good example. Alternate Tax closed like last week. They've been in Germany for like 10 plus years, every single year playing like the ESL Meisterschaft. They've even gone to Cologne, etc. Sprout's another good example. So a lot of organizations close the doors, and they all put it down to basically saying, without an RMR, we actually don't know where we're going to get to secure money, or like for sponsors, it's really hard to say that we have this sort of potential. So I think that's one of the big things. And, you know, I think it originally was seen as a good idea because the RMRs had their problems with like the formatting, but that's not changed. Heading in towards the new system of like 32 team extra Swiss stage, we still got best of ones. That was the ultimate issue for me with the RMR, was like, I never think best of ones should be anyway in and around a major in any sort of format, but we still got that heading in towards that Swiss stage. So I feel like the real issue wasn't the RMRs themselves, and I know they kind of accredit to the busy schedule, but it's still relatively busy regardless. I mean, the RMRs were a little bit longer, sure, but I don't know. For me, I really feel like the RMRs is where we got a lot of really good storylines and fairy tale moments. It was make or break for a lot of the players. A lot of the best players we got now, I mean, like half the Na'Vi roster came through one fairy tale run at Paris. So for me, that's where I look at this and I say, like, I'm going to miss all the storylines behind it. I think now it's just going to seem like, not obviously it's the major and it's the biggest event of the year, etc., one of the biggest events of the year, but it's still going to not feel like this moment of, oh my God, how is this team qualified kind of thing. It's just going to be, well, they're coming in off the rankings. We already knew who was going to be there. And, you know, even people like Messio from Complexity, who like, he's like an insane whiz of like all the numbers and the Valve points. And he knows, like, you know, a month and a half in advance, right? Like, this is, you know, who's going to make it, and as long as they don't lose this certain best of 3, we've made it, this, that, and the other. So I'm going to miss that. I feel like, you know, the real kind of narratives around it is kind of what made Counter-Strike good for me in the kind of the tier 2 coming up. These are all these storylines. So yeah, I'm going to miss it. And I think, you know, they haven't fixed the fundamental issue, which is still just best of ones.
So in the HLTV article that talks about the death of RMRs, which was published a couple of weeks ago, and I was making sure about this because I wasn't certain when you brought this topic up. it doesn't say that necessarily everything is going to be via Valve ranking alone. And so there may be some sort of hybrid aspect to this. And so I'm going to just be a little bit optimistic here because I actually think that the RMR system was pretty fun. I'd say that. It was really fun. But I also don't think that the way I saw it is that you should be in the next major guaranteed if you keep your core lineup together and you're in the top 4 of the previous major. Like I didn't want to really give passes to teams that actually simply made it to the playoffs, but teams that actually won a game in the arena component in a BO3. I don't see why those top 4 teams should not be invited to every single major forever. Like, I mean, obviously, don't keep giving them the pass. I'm not saying get grandfathered, and I'm saying the most previous major.
Yes.
But now it looks like it's going to be mostly due to the Valve rankings. But I think it would be really cool, personally, if they decided, okay, actually, the top X teams of each region based off of who finishes in the legend stage or whatever, the championship stage, all of that kind of stuff. If those teams are creating slots based off of the Valve rankings, which then are implemented, but then we have something kind of like back in the day where it was the major closed qualifier where they played it on LAN in the kind of the same area as the actual major that was to come very shortly after that. I actually think that if there was a component like that, like say there were actually, this would be a hugely logistical nightmare, by the way. This would be so difficult to handle, but it would be 24 teams essentially make it through immediately to the major, and then the final 8 spots were battled out through, say, the 16 teams that were ranked the highest in the Valve ranking behind them. In fact, including more spots for like Asia, the Americas, etc. And if there was some sort of component like that, I think that would be best because I do feel like at the end of the day, I do like the fact that there is an open circuit here. I just think that the storylines that it creates are sometimes the most engaging, endearing, and sometimes life-changing, as you already referenced in what happened at Paris for a few of those teams there. But I also think that I want the best teams there. I just want the best teams there. And for my money, the teams that are probably in the top 24 Valve ranking all should be there every single time. I don't want them to get bounced in the RMRs. Like, that was the worst part of the RMRs. I like seeing the teams that are, say, ranked 50th in the world have a cool run to get into the, like, deep into the tournament. But if it was at the expense of a team that was top 4 in the world, top 5 in the world, like when Cloud9 didn't even make it to Paris, for example, like that wasn't cool. Like that team, I wanted that team to play there, even though I obviously had it out for Nafany, and look how that turned out, by the way. I don't necessarily want him to not even be at the major, you know? So I hope that there's some kind of compromise here. That's basically what I'm getting at. I'm actually glad that the RMRs are gone and that there's going to be more invites to the major, but I wish there was some still very arduous but possible route for an open qualification via winning consecutive series through the open format that we've come to like, or at least some of us have.
Being as you did frame this as a bad point, that's why I knew this would be an interesting topic, because I don't actually agree. Like, I can agree on this sense, right, which is, here's how I would frame it, is if the major's supposed to be for everyone, like casual fans and hardcore fans, I would prefer something like what Maui's saying. Like, I'll give you a compromise. Like, to me, the problem we've had at the moment is we've done one or the other. So we used to have, like, an extreme version of what Mau used to say. We used to have it where if you just made top 8 at the major, guaranteed you're in the next major no matter what, no matter the context of who was. So famously, that's actually why Fallen's team at the time, it was Kaboom and then Keyd Stars, etc. They only qualified to that first major, but because they kept making top 8 even before they had like Cold Zero, etc., they used to automatically be in the next one, so they never had to go through another qualifier. So that's actually how they got their start. So I think that version, the problem is though, is you can get results like that. Like, if people don't know, because back then the majors used to have BO1s if you won the 2 BO1s. The team I just referred to, that Brazilian team, famously at the time, couldn't beat any ranked team in a best of 3, but because they kept going and winning BO1s, you kept getting them in the next major. So I always thought that's like, on the one hand, you found talent, but you actually haven't thought a sturdy system. Like, they're making the next major without even ever winning a series against someone. They're just winning like BO1s with sometimes randomized maps, etc. So I do think that was negative, but I acknowledge that the people out there do want, like, the notion of novelty, like new players and new teams and a team basically what people want the movie. The movie is, like, I actually think the sport that's encapsulated as the best is actually poker. When poker got huge, it wasn't because people like to watch professional poker. What made poker huge was the World Series of Poker, because the premise is any fucking noob, any of us in this call can go on, as long as you have $10,000, you can enter the main event. And this actually happened in 2003. You might, in theory, because there's a lot of lock-in tournament poker, you could actually fuck around and win it. Like, there's a guy back then, it almost seemed fake, because even his actual surname was fucking Moneymaker. Literally, he was called Chris Moneymaker. He was a random nobody guy who got in from like a satellite tournament or something, and he really did win the World Series. By the way, he wasn't even close to one of the best players. When you saw him, like, I actually followed poker back then. But the point is, I do think people want, with all these underdog runs, Game of Legends is the best example because they almost bloody won the major. They want to believe that if a team really wasn't actually in the top tier of CS, but for reasons like partnership reasons, or they can't get over the hump in an online qualifier, they want it to be that, like, if they really were, like, secretly cracked, like this team maybe was, we'll never get to know, sadly, because they broke up immediately afterwards, maybe they could go to the major in this last chance qualifier, as it were, which is what the RMR basically was, and if they're good enough, they can just make it all the way to the final win. And, like, essentially, no one's being gate kept out of the top end of the scene in that analogy. Like, whoever's good enough just gets there. Right? The one flaw I have with that goes like this, which is, I think they're both too extreme. The old one, you're making too many teams come through, like, sort of the Hawks, it's top 8. And then the RMR one, you made, like, even, like, the joke there, and luckily it never happened, was you had basically, apparently the only major winner that didn't qualify for the next one was the Outsiders one. Aside from that, every major winner always qualifies. What people haven't realised is we're just really lucky that there wasn't ever a random day, this could have happened, where, like, the best team in the world just lost the RMR and didn't even make it to the major. Because if that had happened, it kills so much of the major. It even kills, by the way, the validity of whoever else wins the major, because you know the best team wasn't there for that one day. So in my opinion, I actually think, look, I'm only the elitist. If it was only Thorin's Counter-Strike, like Flashpoint, I would make it so there was zero open qualification. I would basically have it. That was going to be my initial point. The reason why I'm against it is because I think if you're actually good enough, then there should be other ways to make it into the same circuit, which are the IEM events and the Blast events, which then, once you then prove yourself in the ranking, will get you into the major. Like, the system actually, the new system will already cover that. Now, look, as you referenced Messi also, there are a lot of issues. I saw they even finally addressed this on Itchel TV Confirmed. There are a lot of issues with the new Valve system, and the fact that, unfortunately, it might actually end up just being the same, like 30 teams attending all the same lands, just cycling in and out, all winning prize money and points, and then there'll be a load of really good teams who in the past did sometimes break through, won't be able to get in. Like, in the future, the example I would give is, in the future, I don't think you'll be able to be a team like the Mongols and come from nothing, because how would you even break in to get to the point where you're at the Colognes of the world, etc.? Like, I think you'll be in a tough spot. So I would go in the middle, basically. My compromise I would offer is this. I actually think the game that did this the best, it's just you have to understand, in Dota, they complain about everything no matter what. So you'll never know as an outsider if things are good. Dota had the best system for the international, which is what they used to do was they had a circuit a la the Valve ranking. So let's say, like, I think in this last one it was only 6 teams got invited, but it used to be just basically, like, I think it was like top 10 or top 12 or something. Those teams got invited. Well, if you think about it, that solves one of my problems I've mentioned, which is you don't want, like, an actual elite team failing the RMR, right? You, like, as in, it's even bad for the team that beats them, because, like I say, it makes the major itself less prestigious if the top teams aren't there. So when you do this system that they had then, let's say in their system you do 8 or 10 teams, then what you did is you did have qualifiers like an RMR regionally for the other teams to come in, and then you could come through that. I would go even more harsh. So I would personally, like, if we're going to imagine a major has old system, 24 teams, I would just for real do the Valve system, tweak the ranking so it's good, as in, even if I disagree, it's like, you know, you have number 1, number 3. It can never be number 1's number 11 or something, because then there's a fucked system. But as long as it's vaguely close, we can all agree, you know, this is the range, this is how good the teams are. If you do that system and it's sturdy, then bring whatever you want, top 16, top 20 if you want. And then, but I'd just have like 4 slots. Have an RMR system, but just for pure outsiders in this sense. Because that way, by the way, this also fixes another economic problem, which is that is another way that the smaller team can still, like, get relevance. They can get buyouts for their players. They can get funding from the sticker money. They can actually themselves, like, show they're good if they can't make it to a Cologne invite, etc. So I don't mind. Give a few slots. My problem before was everyone had to come through an open qualifier. I think that's fucking crazy as it is. Or we just let, like, every playoff team from a past major, as Maui says, they might not have even done anything yet. I agree with his top 4 one, because that one's like they've at least won a fucking match in an arena at a major. But you also can accomplish the same thing, like I say, by just inviting from the ranking. So I would personally say, like everything in esports and politics, it's always like the correction's always an overcorrection, the other bloody direction. I would go somewhere in the middle. I'd have, like, some slots invited, so we guarantee viewership, by the way. And then I'd also have some teams can make it last minute if they really show off the perform, just don't make it the entire field. Because the last thing I'll say is this, which is I actually think at the moment, even though I said I'm an elitist, I actually think at the moment, the actual reality of the industry plays to my side, which is, sorry, because that site exists, guys, ES Charts. I've made this point a million times to Maui, but we've proven you're all wrong. Like, mathematically, you're all liars. Because you know what everyone goes, no, stop hating on underdogs. I love when no, you don't. The literal numbers prove you don't tune into the later games when the underdog wins. I've got it right now. I pulled up the notorious Blast Paris Major. Here are the ones that just give away that you don't watch underdogs play because you don't know them, they're not famous, and you don't have that connection to them, and they don't have a massive fan base, right? If you remember, in the last game of the Swiss system, there was that amazing game between FaZe and Na'Vi. Everyone remembers it? Where it was that Anubis game that went like 1 million rounds. That was the second highest viewed game in the whole tournament. That was in the fucking Swiss system because it's FaZe and Na'Vi. Everyone knows FaZe and Na'Vi. Meanwhile, by the way, that means that match, guys, was ahead in viewership of Vitality Apex semi-final, Heroic Gamer Legion semi-final. If you don't know, by the way, Heroic Gamer Legion was even like one of the best series of the fucking tournament. But the point is, the second a casual fan, who's the one telling me he wants the upset, goes, oh, what's the next match? Heroic Gamer Legion. He just goes, I'll tune in the final and see if it's Heroic Vitality. He doesn't fucking watch that game. I'm sorry, he doesn't. Meanwhile, even though, look, this isn't what I want, I don't want it to be WWE. If I make a match tomorrow that is like fucking Na'Vi against Furia, it doesn't even matter if Furia's good. That game automatically probably can get like fucking, you know, like record-breaking numbers or like the crazy viewership. So I'll just say, you also at the moment cynically want all the top teams to make it. Like, look, I'm still allowing a factor where some of them could fail if they're not high enough in the rankings. But in a way, you actually want every big top team to make it if possible, because that's currently, we're just an eyeballs industry right now. We haven't got the pay-per-view down. We haven't got all those other, we haven't got regional aspects down. So I think you've got some good points there, but I also do think there's other ways we can do it. There's other ways we can fix the scene.
Yeah, I agree. I just even touched on that as well with
the
go for it. Major. I know people who for the Vitality Apex game who just like didn't even come into the arena. They were like having drinks because they were like, I don't give a fuck about Apex. Sure. Or another good one is like people who are like saying like the Game Legion Monty, I think it was like Game Legion just spanked Monty. They were like, it's I don't really know these guys. So
no, exactly.
Get a drink. So I do agree. I wish there just was like some sort of blend, because like I think even like B&E when they made their runs, like that was like such a cool thing, and it became like, even for the more casual fans, they like knew about B&E.
Oh, sure, yeah,
kind of thing. So if there was a blend of where we get something. I mean, I think just even touching on Maui's point, like it's a logistical nightmare having like all these different teams from regions. But maybe even if you had like the last 8 spots were divided in some way, then between like a few to EU, a few to Asia, a few to Americas, whatever, and somehow divided it so you got at least some open qualifier teams, and then it's like a blend of both. That would be like the dream. But I think the big thing about having all the main teams there is a huge thing. I mean, I was one cast in that C9 game where like Shiro was crying and stuff, and it was like, I remember like casting be like, oh shit, that's actually a big team they've lost for the major. Like that's kind of
oh, the last chance qualifier thing, you mean, right?
Yeah,
right.
The last chance qual, yeah. And when like Shiro was crying, I was like, shit, because it was them and FaZe. It was like a pretty big team in there, and it was like, we're guaranteed that 2 out of the 3 of these big teams at the last 6 in this last chance qual are not making. I think Bait was another one, but obviously they're not a big team. But it was like, we're losing like some of these big teams here for the major, which is gonna obviously just hit the viewership in some way. Whereas like, ITB are making it. I love ITB. Like, no offense to them, but like, the average fan doesn't give a shit about them. So yeah, no, if there was like a blend, I'd be super happy. But I'm sad that I think that the RMRs are just going to be the same teams over and over again, basically.
Right, Maui, what is your bad point?
Mine is, and I brought this up because we obviously all watched them win at Elisa Espo, but ENCE have practically no way to build off of their Elisa win. And even though they showed a lot of promise with how they were able to beat the Mongols and Heroic in pretty high pressure moments, it's just that everybody knows what's going to happen now. You win an event like this, you're ENCE, people are looking at you a little bit closer. You're going to join CCT Season 7, Series number 4, immediately invited to the playoffs, and then you're going to lose to the 45th ranked team in the world that nobody's heard of. And people are going to say it was a fluke victory at Elisa, when in reality, it's just that, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that why ENCE was able to win that one. A lot of it due to, giving credit to them. Glaive played really well. The rookies played very well. SDY was very strong in the tournament, but they just don't have LAN events anymore. There's no LAN events for them to play until the upcoming year. They're relegated now to just playing online. They're not playing the RMR at this point and that's actually why they were able to pull the trigger on the roster moves that they made. And I just feel like they're in a position where for the next 2+ months, they're never going to be able to live up to the expectation, which is that, hey, it almost feels like a curse to me that they won that tournament, because you're going to now think in the back of your mind, hey, when we're back at LAN, we're going to be able to do well. But it's like, that's unfortunately, that might just never happen. Like, legitimately, you might actually never see a LAN again with this 5-man lineup. Like, I don't see one that's in the future for them. I don't see why they would get invites to anything. They're not high enough ranked. And by the time the next year rolls around, the Valve rankings are going to change so much because of all these teams that are playing at the RMR, the major itself, that this Elisa win might not even have a serious effect on what happens at the events once we engage with this new partner list circuit that is to come. So I feel like that's just kind of the, usually there's a silver lining to things, like, but there really isn't. It's just that this team is now just going to have to go through the online gauntlet like everybody else. And Glaive, who had a great grand final, like, did it on LAN. Like, when Glaive's on LAN in a high pressure moment, yeah, that's why we have faith in him. That's why we want him to be on a team like G2, because we know that that's possible. But Glaive online has shown me absolutely nothing for the last 9 months. Like, absolutely nothing. So I don't see how he's just suddenly going to be better online than he was at Elisa in person.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta agree. I even thinking as well, I don't even know what tournaments are up at the end of the year, because like all the res circuit is done.
There's almost nothing left. Isn't it just a major? Isn't it just a major?
Yeah, I think they've maybe got. There was one I saw they got announced for, which is like A1 or something, and I think it is very much like random teams in there. Like it normally is not even like, I think most of them aren't even really on HLTV. Is up until kind of this one. I guess they may have some of the teams who aren't making it to the RMR. I think like another good example, like Monty maybe, because I know they're not in the RMR as well, but like a decent team on paper. But I agree. I think like ENCE could actually just like that is like their RMR there at Elisa, and they could be absolutely fucked now for the rest of the year. Like, they have to just sit by, wait. I mean, you can do these dry runs and these pracs and all the rest, but I really don't know like what next year's gonna look like for them, because I know currently they're like in a top 30 team, but there's a very good chance they could just tumble depending on how other sort of fringe top 30 teams do at the RMR, either they make it towards the major, etc. So this is a side that could really struggle to get any sort of Valve kind of invites, Valve ranking invites, and they could be in a really awkward spot come next year. I think like first event of the year is like the Blast like bounty stuff. I don't even know really how the invite's going to work for that, but they are probably not even a team that I would even consider in there. So I think they could be in a lot of trouble. The only thing I would say is like at least online, that like core 3 youngsters of kind of Potty Ne0kai and Kaspersky, they're like online vets these days. These guys have been grinding. Right. So like at least I can kind of bank on them. Like Ne0kai, I think he actually plays better. Well, from what I've seen him play like insanely good online. He was pretty good at Elisa, but he's somebody that you can rely on a lot. I think SDY has done quite a good job when he's played online. It's just Glaive that I worry about. Like, he looks super uncomfortable in a lot of the online ENCE games that I've casted, especially compared to what we saw of them at Elisa. But they're not going to get a chance to play. I mean, sometimes, I mean, for a lot of the tier 2 guys, when we kind of start our, year off or whatever, we don't really expect work until about February. So we could not even see these guys play until like February time, which is such a long time to just sit back, have to dry run. You've got at least kind of like, 3 to 4 months of like scrims and pracs, but without the officials, I really don't think it's going to make any difference. So people are going to start to figure them out via the scrims as well. So I'm a little bit worried about ENCE as well. I agree. I think they're in a bit of an awkward spot. I don't know if that's like sort of indicative of the scene itself or just like this side and what's next for them, but who knows, like with like the hype around players like Ne0kai and Kaspersky, they could even get poached as well.
Yeah, that's also the fact that Maui didn't even add in. It's like, actually, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Like, even if you show anything in the next few months, because there's no lands, what if someone comes along and offers you a really cynical deal where it's like slightly too much to say no to, but at the same time, you can't just like turn it down because then you'd be an idiot because this player himself hasn't done anything yet. If that happens, you're fucked, because what you're basically gambling on, if you're the guys from ENCE, is that like NKJ, if he's the one who found them, has scouted out the next young talents, like we've been saying about like picking people where they've got the raw fundamentals and then you're going to like level them up as a coach and an IGL, and you're going to put them with Glaive and some Dai Young who's a veteran. As I pointed out, by the way, on the Elisa Esport tournament, I even think the underrated thing about the ENCE lineup is that they actually did learn the lesson that even teams like MOUZ didn't, which is they have 2 veterans and 3 youngsters. That's the combo you want. And if you notice, some Dai Young does have some good positions, to be fair, but in general, you want the actual veterans to be more on like the supportive end of the game and round out the squad. And then what you want to do is take your Brit. It's like me and Mau, we've talked on off camera about this previously. It's basically how Dota has worked for about 10 years now, is they don't really do the thing in the back of the day of like, use the eye test, is he good? What they do in the modern day is similar to what that discussion we had about League and CS a minute ago. They just know that if you're really high ranked in Dota, what that means is you definitely have cracked up mechanics. So you've got like really high skill level. So what they do is they take you, give you the carry role, which is just like mindless farming and hitting people and damaging them. And then all the things about the game that are really difficult that require experience, like being the jungler or the support or the captain or something, like all that shit, doing the wards and the timings. That's the person who's a veteran, because that's where his experience comes into play, but he doesn't need the crazy hands. So I actually think even that ENCE has quite an interesting blend. Like I actually think some Dai Young, if on paper he's actually supposed to be like your 3rd or 4th best player, it's not a bad team then. Suddenly we can cook with this, mate. Like if it's actually going to turn out Skarsgård is actually like a pretty cracked player and Poddy's just legit, suddenly you've got a team. But as you're saying, like Maui pointed out, there's not even a venue to prove yourself. Because the other thing I do think really does hurt modern CS is there is an enormous tier 2 scene now. It's giant. It's why we're saying it's producing all these talents. But you notice most of it's online, which is the killer, unfortunately. Like the difference was tier 2 back in the day was DreamHack Opens and these smaller lands that like Supernova one in Malta and all those, like eventually DreamHack Winters eventually became like this as well. But the good thing about that was it still was like in this Esprit tournament, you had to like win on stage, you had to win in a LAN environment, you had to go to another country. These things I actually did think also helped vet people and show you that you were legit. So unfortunately, even if ENCE, by the way, won every single online cop, I don't think it'll actually add to their like status and make people think they're legit. And even worse, like Maui said, it could actually be a negative. Like if they lose a single one of them, by the way, they're going to get fucking destroyed. And in fact, it's going to be so many months before the lands that I think by then, I always have a rule of like, after about 2 months, no one really cares. I mean, the joke is earlier on, we made a great point about MOUZ. It was only something about 5 weeks ago, they were shit. They were in the toilet, but that's how quick CS changes. You go to a couple of lands and you get some fucking matches under your belt, your narrative can like multiply this way, or it can multiply the negative way. And unfortunately for ENCE, in this analogy, if anything, their status is just going to stay and decay, and it'll just become forgotten in the mists of time, which I actually do think is pretty sad because, like, look, I think part of me thinks some of that was a honeymoon and maybe it wouldn't replicate. I even sort of low-key, I'm just going to be a hater. I think if they replayed Mongols and Heroic did lose to them, I think those were the better teams on paper. But I do think, like, I would like the chance to see it, though. I'd like the chance to actually know if they're legit, especially because I have the obvious bias, which is, I do like the idea that we're not just casting Glaive into the fucking pit to just burn forever. Like, why? This is one area, by the way, guys, you've really got to understand that concept I've explained before called CS royalty, right? You know, when you all tell me that I'm being silly here, what happens is what you do is all legendary players you give respect to, and they're all the ones that aren't legendary. You do no, like you do realize in CS:GO, like fucking Glaive is significantly more legendary than Fallen, but we're all just letting Fallen coast on these giant buyouts and enormous salaries. But meanwhile, I'm being told, I heard behind the scenes, nobody wanted Glaive. Not Astralis, nobody. None of these fucking teams. Nobody gives a fuck about Glaive. Like, how a player like that can just be told after basically, we're only talking about 2 years. It's not like a 5-year span. The online period, no one counts. We're basically talking about, because of 2 years of, by the way, always scuffed lineups in Astralis. Not a single one of those lineups is a real lineup. You know the dirtiest thing they actually did to Glaive was he never got a real team. He always had a talent type player or a Farley or so. He never got like the roster that they have now. If you give him one crack at that and he fails, I'll say, okay, fair enough. You know what? Maybe he's cooked. So I don't know if he is totally cooked. I have to say that LAN made it look like he wasn't. I'm not going to go the other way like Richard and make it he's back. He's the king of CR. But I'll tell you what, that was a very, on all respects, that was a very promising LAN tournament though, where at least, if you think about this, if people are trying to like save money by like, getting young stars, there should be a mentality also of another way you can save money is get an old star or an old legend that isn't that viable. No one else wants them. You pick them up shrewdly, you make a team around them. So I just think it's sad for everyone involved. Everyone's just going to be sat on the shelf for a while now. It just kind of sucks.
Okay, if you want to hear something that's a little, I mean, I'd say just temper your expectations about ENCE in the future.
Okay,
My van from the hotel to the airport, I may have had a van with heroic players and maybe ENCE players or somebody on ENCE or some people on heroic, and they might have confirmed that Heroic couldn't change their playbook at all from Rio, and ENCE was able to look at all of their demos, and then when they played the grand final, it was the exact same playbook.
Okay. So basically,
not the hardest team to game plan against.
Basically, not only was IM Rio shit, it even ruined the S4 tournament finals. Fucking hell. Well, those Brazilians never just give us anything in CS. You know what? You will never understand us. We just want good games. We don't want you ruining our whole fucking scene. Get out. You're not welcome. No, that's a joke. That's only to the Furia fans. The rest of the Brazilian fans are welcome. People who enjoy teams like Imperial and Pain, you're all cool. Don't worry about that. Also, it's just a bomber, isn't it, when you hear something like that? Because, you know, when you hear that, man, you just, as an analyst, you want to go, could you maybe have told me that before I did my prediction for the final, dickhead? You know what I mean?
I know.
So,
yeah.
Why are you going to tell me that now? I know, like...
I hear both sides of it, and I'm just
I love it.
So that was basically like you guys were playing a bot match where you knew exactly what was going to happen in these rounds. That's cool.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. My bad point is a bit of a... I think it'll take a setup for this. People might not get what I mean by this. This reminds me, this major coming up. It's going to sound like a mad bomber when I say it, but sorry, it's a bad point. It has to be a bomber. This major coming up. Now I can see why Kassad revived that topic. This does feel a little bit like that IM Rio Major from 2022, where if you remember, one of the things a lot of us flamed was the top end of CS at the time looked a bit scuffed. And by the way, it was, because this is why I'm going to tie it to this major. The one downside for this major, look, I have positives. Like, for example, I'm very excited to see how Na'Vi does. They're so good, maybe they should win the major. This one would be legit, by the way. This could even give them an era. There's all lots of narrative aspects that I like. But here's what I hate. It's one thing if we get a circuit that is structured, which is how CS is now, a bit like League or Dota, where like you have your Worlds or your TI, and people are then going to obviously evaluate rosters after that, aren't they? They're going to go, right, we'll give them one last chance at the Major or TI or Worlds, and if you bomb that, then, or we don't win if we're supposed to be a favourite, then we consider, you know, do we need to make a change? Do we need to upgrade someone? Was this guy not working out? Is there a better player we can bring in? My problem is this. That makes perfect sense relative to where you are in the scene. So, for example, if you're the team that was like number 4 all the time and you never won any lands, and then you give one last chance at a major, you don't win. Obviously, you'll make play change because you want to be a top team, you want to win tournaments. But here's the very key way of framing it that I think is negative about this major. With the exception of Na'Vi, and spoiler, I think that's only because they've made every fucking final and you'd be ludicrous to change the roster. Every other team that's a top team, as far as I know, there are legit rumours they will change players after this major. Now, spoiler, only one team can win the major. If it's really the case that essentially whoever wins just gets to not change players, and every other, like number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if they all change players, the reason why that's a bomber is because that shows that actually this major can't be as strong as we would hope it would be. Because in other eras, if you have like a real top 5 that are all just cracked out rosters that are really good, then you understand if you don't win the major, that like, hey, that was just that one tournament. Maybe we are still the best. Maybe we'll win the next one. Maybe we'll come. Like the idea, what that says to me is, it's just because of the economics and the contract situations in the scene. They essentially all those teams, except maybe the Na'Vi, would already have changed their players. Like if you go look at, literally look at the entire top 5 guys. If you go look at Vitality, spoiler, there's a reason there's a million rumors about them getting torn every direction internally. People want in and out, and other people in and out, and that's it. That is a nightmare. That one right there. Even though to me, by the way, on paper, if I'm like playing Championship Manager football CS version, I'm sticking with that roster all the time. We talk about I can win every major for like 3 years, mate, if that works out. But they want to change. FaZe Clan's almost certainly going to change if they don't. When you just look at the roster results recently, G2, by the way, it's even implied. I think everyone's finally got on the same page with me. The whole reason why they've even done this weird snacks gamble and bring MOUZ and made him an anchor is because this isn't the real G2 lineup. They know they're losing NE0kai and or MonteCristo, and they're going to rebuild around what they've got at that point. So they're almost doing a weird like hedge the roster so that you can pivot like essentially, I've said this before, I think MOUZ will just become the new NE0kai. He'll just get put in an NE0kai spot, so he'll be getting to be the star player. So you go down the roster, it's like that for almost every team guy, even Spirit. Well, obviously everyone hates on Zontics all the time, or will they bring in a Perfecto or something, you know, VP's going to change. It's actually, no joke, you bring up the top 10, it's the other way around, except for like small teams like the Mongols. Who the fuck isn't going to change teams? So my issue is more just that I think it shows that it's sort of like, I don't think the teams themselves believe in these lineups. So I still think it can be a very good major. Like the actual race for the top 8's mega, but it's not like what I want. I want the major to be where it's like we actually have some of the all-time generational teams. And this isn't literally going to make or break your entire roster. Like if you're really good, you maybe win it and you prove you're awesome, or you don't and then you come back next time. But I think it's just a bit of a bummer for me when I feel like for me, I'm actually a very elitist in that sense. I want the top end of the scene to be really strong. I want them all to have rosters they believe in, that they can, like my dream essentially would be that the top 5 teams all go to this major. They go, of course we're all winning it. Well, my team's winning it. No, mine is like, I think our half these teams know they're not, and it's more like, but if we did, maybe we stay together, which I think is a very negative mindset to enter a major with.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I really feel like the major itself is the sort of conversation you normally have around a major is overshadowed by the rumor mill of who's going where, and like even like especially number 3 and number 4 in the world right now, like Vitality and MOUZ, is like, is Vitality going to drop Mezzi and pick up Yimfa, and like all of this, which is insane when you think that like Vitality should see themselves actually where like. Okay, because like G2 are ranked 2 at the moment, but like we all know that they're not the second best team in the world. So it feels like, Vitality, you have a very good claim to say, oh, we're the second best side, or MOUZ can also make that argument. And it feels like we normally go in towards each and every major cycle and say, these are the top teams, and any of these can win it. But I feel like it's really hard at the moment where every single team is rumored to make changes that, like you said, they'd have no confidence in themselves. And I don't know whether that's actually sort of a little bit of an indictment of kind of how uncertain next year's circuit is. I mean, we still sort of don't know. Obviously, we've had these tournaments announced. There's going to be a hell of a lot of them, a lot of opportunities to kind of rank up through, but people just still feel really nervy. I've even spoke to people kind of in a lot of these top teams, and they just kind of really have no idea how insane it's going to be. On paper, it looks so busy, but they don't know really what's going to happen. So I think a lot of teams are super uncertain, and hence because they're uncertain, they're trying to get like ahead of it, and then because of it, they're trying to get ahead of it. They're trying to make changes, or at least ideas of what the changes are going to be, before we've even had time to see what they're like towards the end of the year. Where in the past it was always like, you finish your major cycle. I mean, granted, we used to have kind of tournaments after the major cycle, like Blast World Finals and whatever, but that's your period of when you make changes. You'd finish the big tournament of the year, the one that really matters, and then we go into kind of making these roster decisions. But now it's like, the second the major finishes, most teams, I mean, I would say like most teams basically coming forward. I mean, you mentioned the Mongols, I think you're spot on, but like even then, you go just past the Mongols, you got teams like Saw, for example.
Oh, sure.
They're making changes like 2 weeks before the RMI even fucking happens. Like, teams are panicking, and I think this is the big thing. I think you're spot on. I think a lot of teams are like really not focusing on what is the thing, because on the other side, the stupid thing about it is like you got teams like Vitality, for example, who are like apparently, making these kind of decisions about whether Mezzi stays, and MOUZ are thinking that they might get gutted and all this. And then the second they win one tournament, they're like, oh, it's fine, guys, it's fine. But then, like, how long until that conversation comes up again for them? Or is this just going to be a constant rinse and repeat cycle of like, oh, okay, we've got to make a change. Actually, we've just won a real big S-tier tournament or a major or whatever. Let's just stick together and see how long this goes. And then it's just like a rinse and repeat, rather than saying, right, I just believe in this 5. Like we've seen with Na'Vi, and I'm going to fix the stuff in the server or in the kind of the prac rooms and get this side on the same page, and not have them constantly. I'm sure, if you're like Mezzi, for example, who like once a week has like a post saying, is he getting dropped for Yimfa? I'm sure it can't fucking help the confidence like at all. So yeah, I agree with you. I feel like it's kind of, for me, it feels like it's really overshadowed the major itself, where it's just talking about what's happening post major. And Falcons and G2 is the great example. When Ne0kai going to Falcons, you got more people talking about that than saying like, can G2 actually even do anything to prove themselves as a 5? And everyone's basically just given up on Snacks already, but have they given up on themselves? It feels super weird. Like a lot of dead rosters and a lot of teams who just feel dead on the inside, with like no expectations heading in towards this major, even though they really should be, because they're like a ranked top 10 side.
This is just the problem with having international English-speaking lineups for every top team now, because there's no loyalty anymore.
Yes.
There's, what's the point? Why would you even stick around? Like, you have no reason to connect yourself to an organization anymore, because it's not really your fellow countrymen. It's just who's going to pay you the most. And now that's why, I mean, the ever encroaching Falcons will swoop up or scoop up a couple of these top stars, gut these other lineups that are supposed to be tier 1 orgs, and it's just going to be this constant bidding for who is going to get the most expensive team, who's going where next. And I feel like if there was ever a reason to desire as an organization some sort of like national pride, in a way, I kind of like the fact that Astralis is what they are as a Danish lineup, Big's what they are as a German team, because it just feels like they just stuck to the project. They stuck to the plan. They're staying with those groups. We've gotten mad at kassad and Tapson for not trying to find some success on an international team, but in a way, at least I know that they're stable. I know that they're probably not going anywhere, and I think that's enviable. That's an enviable position now as an organization, to know that there's loyalty that's baked into the fact that you're a national team. So for G2, FaZe, MOUZ, Na'Vi, Falcons, what have you, we always are just theory crafting who's going where next, who's going where. And that's why, in a lot of ways, this scene would also, again, they'd be progressed by just having open contracts, because then we can actually just watch the major and then we don't have to theory craft this. I personally don't really know everybody on MOUZ's contract. I think a couple of them have been talked about actually before, but and HLTV has actually started to list what people's contracts are in general, right. But they're not like Yimpat's does not show on HLTV, for example. It doesn't say. And usually if they have the info, they're going to list it right there on their current team. They're going to say contract ends X date, as it has with like Case. If you go to Caserato's page, I'm pretty sure it says it there. So it's just frustrating because I can't just really in for whatever reason, it's like you can barely talk about the teams anymore in the state that they're in, and so frequently fans would rather hear, like, this is basically like every stream I do. It's like dude, Vitality will lose one map and then people be like, so who should they cut? It's like, can we just like, I mean, like, sure, that's like, it's the next step, and I understand that's where you want to go with it, but can we at least try to talk about the flaws in the CT side? Can we try to talk about what's going on in terms of the actual gameplay? And I mean, it is just like the lowest common denominator way to see the game is just like, what's coming next? What trade should they do? As opposed to actually doing the most bare minimum amount of analysis regarding their actual gameplay and saying maybe they should just have a double op setup, or, like, you know, I'm just throwing out a random example there. Like, maybe they should just change who's actually looking for the openers in that one. And it's like, that's yeah. So I think yeah, in a weird way, this major is lightly marred by that, and I just kind of hope that for the sake of what goes on in terms of narrative surrounding it, that we don't just get too wrapped up in those kinds of ideas and can appreciate what's actually before us, which is, for my money, I know you say this, like a lot of teams are looking to upgrade and everything like that. I think a lot of these teams are playing really good CS. Like, I feel like I watch practically any team that's in the top 10, and I'm like, on a given day, they can really beat almost anybody else. I'm not saying that VP is likely to beat Na'Vi on a given day, but like, I wouldn't be surprised if I see VP take down G2. I feel like I'm gonna know exactly what's happening and why Snacks failed. But I think that's more fun for me than saying, okay, cut Snacks. It's like, no, I'd rather talk about why he sucks first, then cut him.
I also do low-key, even though, look, obviously for player agency reasons, I don't want this. I almost wish we could, like, force people to just play for a specific interval of time so that, like, even players can't think that way. Because that's the worst example is Vitality, guys. The reason I always mention all these shows, that when I've looked into, like, my sources behind the scenes, like, look, specific moves that those leakers say might not always be true. Or if you don't know how they operate, it'll be stuff like two players maybe do want someone out and they want a specific player in. But that's very different from Vitality org ever agreeing to that move, or even contacting the player or the other org with a view to actually making a contract happen. So in a way, spiritually, it may be true that, like, some Vitality players want player X out and player Y in, but that's not the same as him ever actually doing it. If anything, the story there is more discontent from players with player X. That's actually more the headline. And the reason why, in a way, I wish we didn't ever get that info publicly. It's one thing behind the scenes, if you ask around, is because I actually do think, like you're saying, Maui, it kind of like ruins the game. Like, when you know that the Vitality that won IEM Clone, by the way, the second they win that event, if I'm that team, I just get together like, boys, we can just win everything in this game. Like, shouldn't we have like an era? But you knowing that team already has tried that whole year to break apart and take people in and out, and that they, if they had their way, would never have gone with that lineup. It's a kind of a bummer, because I've just seen them play like some of the best CS of the year, and they look awesome. So in a weird way, I agree with you, Maui, but not just for fans, for players as well. I almost think it actually encourages a very childish way of thinking. That's almost like a bloody matchmaking game. Like, hey, kick the shit guy out of the stack. It's like, no, actually, can't we like figure out how to play with these players if they're like top players? And sometimes I almost feel like it's like necessity is a mother of invention. If you knew you were locked in, and by the way, I have heard it's like this with some of the G2 lineups, if you know you're locked in for the next year, you're not going to grumble in every interview and go, oh, well, it'll be different. You'll have to just get on with it and put your fucking nose to the grindstone and actually get good. And by the way, maybe you can figure out like a way to work with this player that you're having issues with, or hasn't been integrated into the team, or you're playing the wrong map for him, or whatever. I actually think it would just be a good thing for the scene. By the way, a little detail also on that whole thing of like people wanting to know contract info, but it always inevitably biting you in the arse. You can the way I know that fans say they want that, but they don't because they're too childish and immature with how they deal with it, is I can actually tell you the instances where the big salary hasn't been publicised has almost only ever helped the player in question. So I'll give you an example, and we were all just at an event with ENCE, so maybe some of these guys will know this. One of the things that was actually a detail that went missing, I actually did a Feed the Trolls about this recently with TechGo, where I actually revealed a bunch of this info, was when that ENCE roster split apart, where the old players from Heroic went Nerds to Heroic, and then the others went to Falcons, and obviously Saw went as coach to Heroic, but he didn't stay at ENCE and coach them, and he didn't go to Falcons. One of the things I heard is because he just got a ridiculous contract. Like, I've heard for real, he is one of the highest paid coaches in the entire world of CS. But since as a fan, you don't know that, you haven't hated on Saw, have you? What you've done is you've looked at who he is in his career, and you've gone, well, fair enough, he came up on ENCE, I'm sure it's not a giant org. Heroic's not the biggest org in the world, he's working with like some decent pieces. But if you knew the whole time, though, that he was like a top X coach in terms of money, you'd all do what people do in football, like Ne0kai says, but they do it because they're young or idiots. In football, right, people do the thing, Maui, where they go, because there's some like outrageous football salaries in Europe. They'll take like an insane one. So I'll give you an example. You'd pick someone now who people criticize, like, I don't know, like Anthony for Man United or something. And what you do is you calculate based on his salary, like how much he makes per minute or something, Maui. So then when he plays shit for 10 minutes, you're like, hey, you just wasted like, $2 million. It's something ridiculous. It'd be like 200,000 or something. You figure out some insane amount, like you just wasted 50k doing nothing. And that is the meme, but it's almost known it's a meme right now. Like, when you do that, people know, well, we all know everyone's salaries, and spoiler, because you have everyone's salary, you can do it with anyone. You can pick any team, you can pick Chelsea, you can pick any team. There's going to be a player that's mega overpaid, that's not that good right now. The problem in CS is, when we only know the odd one, people over-scrutinise like that. Like, once you find out s1mple is price tag and makes like the fucking fourth highest salary in the world, or once you find out Zipnix is on the Astralis talent team, but he gets paid better than anyone in like fucking G2, that starts to get a bit bad, and unfortunately, that just becomes something that bangs them out. So much as I'm sure Saw wishes that private information wasn't public, if you are someone who uses the internet, you wouldn't want all of your private information to be known and seen by... Listen, there's skills to this, mate. You've got to understand this, mate. Yeah, you wouldn't want everyone to know everything, would you? Because as part of your data, when you come online, there are actually quite intimate moments. Maybe there's certain photographs you've taken or had sent to you. Maybe you've had certain private conversations and you just don't want that data to be seen or viewed by anyone else, or to be tracked where you're going. Well, if you go online without a VPN, in this case, ExpressVPN, you could accidentally be sharing your data and or private moments and communications with potentially any untold amount of people, millions of different people's websites, apps, different locations, Wi-Fi networks. Because when you go online, obviously, here's another thing, your ISP seeing everything you do and all your data is going through them. They can track it all. They can see all the websites you're going to. So ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure, encrypted servers, so your ISP can't see your browsing history, and you're protected from a number of other outside entities from seeing it. Why is ExpressVPN the best? Well, I'll have to just say my personal opinion. It is very good at hiding your IP address. It makes it difficult for third parties to track you online. It's very easy to use, by the way. It's literally just a super easy app. It's even got like of all the VPNs, I've used like really complicated ones back in the days. You can imagine as a nerd on the eye. They've made theirs as simple. Anyone in your family could use this. It's literally got like a giant red button for like go online, basically. It even has a system where you don't even have to know, you don't have to be internet whiz. It has like automated regional servers that'll go to a close one near you. So you can also, by the way, if you want to set up other people in your household with this, it's very easy to set up a bunch of people on it. Just essentially tell them, click this button, click off, change the server if you need to. It works on all devices you can imagine, phones, laptops, tablets, more. So it's very easy to stay private on the go. It's ranked number 1 by a bunch of tech reviewers. In terms of a personal endorsement, I can tell you not only have I used this myself, especially in a certain very large Asian country when I went there, but also I will just say, actually one of the other people on Last Free Nation, MonteCristo, does a lot of our League of Legends shows. He literally lives in Korea, and there's actually a weird detail about Twitch there, which is that something weird with Twitch Korea is if you're in Korea, it doesn't save VODs, because that was like a system where they couldn't do it. So what he does is he VPNs to another country, which then means that the Twitch system saves the VOD. So it's just a random detail, but it even actually has a quality of life upgrade there if you're in Korea, bizarrely. So similar. And obviously the classic one people obviously mention is if you use any of those streaming services online, they literally have content that is regionalized based on where the licenses are. And if you connect to that region, you can view that data that's in that one. So certain movies might only be on America, certain European countries, you can just switch location, especially if you have a bazillion servers, and then you can just connect there and watch stuff there. Obviously, certain people where maybe in your country, only the player that uses stuff for your regional thing can do that. So check all that out. Obviously, Protect your privacy online today by visiting expressvpn.com/snakebanter. You can see all one word on the screen there. That's expressvpn.com/snakebanter, all one word. And you can get an extra 3 months free. That's expressvpn.com/snakebanter. Now, I'd be doubly annoyed if I was Sox. It's like, one, you've just outed me, and then it was just an intro to an ad, Thorin. It's like, listen, brother, as you should know, some of us have got to get that bag. So, right, Ne0kai, what is your ugly point?
Oh, I gotta say that was masterfully
It was well done.
mate.
It's all good. It's all good.
So for my ugly point, I'm actually gonna basically use my ugly point to sort of link my first 2 points into what is an overarching thing for next year, and it is all sort of hypothetical because no one really knows.
Sure.
But my ugly point is actually what the state of tier 2 is going to look like into 2025. Right? I actually have a feeling that tier 2 is going to start to become a bit of a wasteland for the kind of all the wrong reasons. I think Kassad, my first one is that Kassad sort of touched this a little bit already, but he spoke about match fixing. I don't think that's going to get helped at all with how next year's looking, because each and every match is a lot more important. I think we've already seen kind of how match fixing has become a really big issue where teams, I mean, I've even known of players who have been offered payouts to lose games and stuff like that, and it's unbelievably common. I mean, there's a guy, I think he is now, he might even now still be, but he was the coach of 500 for a while. That Bulgarian's like, I called Grasshog. He's been around for a while. Sorry, yeah, one of those anyway. But he was on 500. He was like a public, match fixing whatever guy. There was like his whole thing. I don't know if exactly it was 500, but I know he was one of the guys who was sort of, he knew him or something like that. But basically, he was like a whole thing. Oh, spy leader. Sorry, that was him. Spy leader.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, spy leader. Very famous. His whole Twitter is just him talking about, like, join my Telegram for fixed
Oh,
games.
wow. Okay.
And granted, whether if it's all real or not, because it could always be bullshit. He's just scamming people. But his whole Twitter, he was a pretty prominent name in the thing. But his whole Twitter is just him talking about match fixed games. But I think that's going to be a big problem in towards next year. I mean, we've got all of the issues where anti-cheat for most tournaments is basically useless. I mean, every single open qual has been plagued with cheaters making it through. Even today, players that have made it to pro league events, for example, like a couple of the guys who are part of the ex-Pera lineup literally got banned all about 2 hours ago for cheating in ESEA or FaZe, I guess now it is. So the cheat is just not good enough. Match fixing is a real issue. But I also think now as well, there's less incentive for a lot of these tier kind of 1.5 tier 2 tournaments to even run in towards next year, because they can't financially convince a lot of teams that it's worthwhile going to their tournaments. We all just worked Elisa. I don't know if Elisa can actually viably run in next year and get to invite big teams, because is that, it was 200 grand for the one we were. Is that even actually going to be enough to convince top teams? Probably not, because most tournaments are running millions of prize pool across the year. So this 200k is not going to be worth the travel in what is already an insanely busy year. Then there's the other thing, and I think again Graham from Complexity touched on this a little bit, where for some people, it's not even worth playing these games. Complexity is absolutely not worth them playing in North America at all because of the Valve ranking points they lose. And same with M80, they touched on this. They lost 4 best of ones, I think 2 of which were forfeits, but they were completely meaningless. They still won the Swiss system in those best of ones. Again, another thing, the formatting there is a little bit rough. Best of ones is your qualification ultimately to Pro League. But they lost 4 meaningless best of ones against random teams. I think 2 of which were forfeits. And they lost 9 or 10 ranking points.
There you go.
Which, if you do that across multiple tournaments, it's not even worth it. I even had a conversation with Richard about this in Finland, saying he was talking about how for teams, for example, if they were to come to let's say an ESO Challenger event, I just come back from doing a Challenger LAN event. There's some decent teams there. Falcons was a good example. Eternal Fire, and both of them actually had really bad tournaments. Falcons finished dead last. Eternal Fire finished second to last, 5th to 6th out of the top 8. That would absolutely crucify them in terms of Valve ranking points. So I think a lot of teams would rather just have one big tournament. Let's say Falcons did a little bit early in the year, or ENCE did it way back at Kato, and just coast on that for as long as they possibly can, and not gamble and not risk, which actually I think is going to end up killing the tier 2. We've seen it this year where a lot of teams have done really good work by playing tier 2 and using it as a way to build confidence. I think credit to them, as much as they're so easy to shit on. OG is a really good example. Their current team's actually done really well, made top 4 at Thunderpick in a pretty stacked lineup. They've been grinding all year, pulling in pieces from the academy sides and doing really well. And they built a pretty solid lineup. And I think a lot of teams have done that. ENCE played a few online tournaments. Monte have done it as well. These CCTs and these Reses and all these sort of ones that just float around the tier 2 circuit. But I think next year, we're not going to see that. Not going to see big names who go and try and earn their stripes and get official pracs, quote unquote, under their belt, because I just don't think it's worthwhile. They're going to lose ranking points. If they even have one slip up, it's going to be super costly, which can end up costing them invites and all of this stuff. And I think it's going to end up potentially killing the tier 2 scene, where we see maybe some of these kind of TOs that would only run specific tier 2 events not be possible. It seems like rumors are, especially like ESR releasing their calendar, it doesn't even look like there's any room for tier 2. We normally have 4 challenger events a year. I don't think it's even worth their while anymore, because they're very, very expensive, and they're not going to be able to convince big teams to go there, and they don't need to do it anymore for the Pro League qualifier spot. So already that's out the window. And with how things have panned out, I think it could end up being a real bad thing, where we're not only seeing, like, as I mentioned earlier, like orgs are pulling out because they don't have this like RMR thing anymore, but then maybe like some TOs who are like specifically just tier 2 based or tier 1.5, they might pull out of this. We might not see as many LAN opportunities for teams who are trying to get their sort of move up in a way. So that for me feels like a really, really big risk. And then also we just see less opportunities now where the scene's going to get bottlenecked. I touched this a little bit earlier at the top. So we don't see, like, when Saw made a top 4 run at Cologne, I don't know if that's going to be possible, because they came through, an ESR ranking invite in towards like a play-in, did really well in the play-in, and obviously really good in the main event. That's so many stages, which it feels like it's probably just going to be eliminated in towards next year. So I'm pretty concerned about that, basically. And I think tier 2 might end up being a bit of like a barren thing, where it's like super online, which is like filled with match fixing and cheaters. And then you've got like this massive jump up into towards the top 30, and the opportunities to actually really climb in your ranks become super, super scarce.
Yeah, I feel like I need to see the I need to see all of the Valve details for their invite system for tier 2 events in a bit more detail, because it feels like it's been changing a little bit. I think they are taking in some of the feedback people like Messioso are publicly giving out. So I hope by the time the next calendar year rolls around, they've modified and refined what it is that they initially stated, because as it stands, it just still, it to me feels like I from everything I've gathered so far, I have such a hard time understanding how any team that's out of the top 50 at the beginning of 2025 is ever going to enter the top 32 or 24, really, that and get those invites to tournaments consistently. In fact, I don't really know how. It's supposed to be for the Austin Major, 32 teams are making it, and let's just disregard what I said earlier about like the RMR counterpoint, which was that I hope that there's some open qualifier component to it. Let's just say it is like the 32 teams make it. A lot of these tournaments that are running, like the Blast ones and ESL ones, they're going to have 24 teams, 16 teams. They're going to have 8 teams of the top teams that are simply just invited. And I don't really understand how those teams aren't going to just kind of go through some sort of like, they're just going to kind of share points more or less, and they're going to take it off of each other. I guess if one keeps losing, I guess that's the one advantage of this, is that you can actually get bumped out by losing games. But like you said, and how Messioso has highlighted, Complexity doesn't really want to even play domestic competitions in any capacity, because they can pretty much, there's so little to gain and so much to lose. And so those tier 1.5 events that they would have maybe chosen to compete in at times in the past, now there's just no incentive to do that. There's only like you might gain like 5 points in the Valve ranking, but you might lose like 70 by losing a couple series. So no, it's very out of order right now. And I do hope that they make some changes, because from everything I gathered so far, I just don't understand how, if you're 60th, 50th and on, whatever, how are you going to make it to the major? I don't get it.
No, I actually think it's also well done to frame this specifically as ugly instead of just bad, because in my opinion, like, there are potential. There's even elements, I think, of how this circuit was designed for the tier 1 teams. Spoiler, this is why, by the way, all people asking for things like player unions and team unions, spoiler, just like real unions, it'll be the people among the workers who have all the power, who then exert their power and do corrupt things, etc. So unfortunately, whenever you make a system where it's like teams like, you've got to be fair to us, that the loudest voice of the tier 1 team. So this circuit was designed designed for tier 1 teams. I'm sorry. It's why I've actually made the point on a bunch of shows that a lot of what people thought was positive, like, remember, everyone was like, brilliant. As soon as you get rid of the partner system, then everyone can qualify. It's like, well, now we've designed a system where, like, Maui's essentially pointing out, if you're just a top 25 team, you just are a partner. You're just essentially a partner of a circuit where even if you're worst, the other guy can't qualify over you anyway. And even if you're coming last, here's an angle that's really dark. If you want the true black pill, here's the black pill Maui. What about if that actually is how next year shakes out? So even if you are the bad team, so I'll give you a random example. Say you're NIP, who's not very good now. Well, here's the joke. At least in the past, the lower team, like Espo, could go to the LAN and beat you as NIP. Imagine instead you go to all the $1 million tournaments and you come last. So all you do is you're now incentivized that the player who could have been on the team that would have beaten you at the Espo tournament, he just joins your team because you're going to be the team that gets into the tournament. Like, you could actually even argue that even the teams that fail, it will be easier for them to get the tier 2 talent into their team because it's the equivalent of every tournament being a partner tournament. Like, that guy can't qualify into that event as the ENCEs of the world used to back in the day, where they could come through like a Blast Showdown or something when they weren't a partner team. So if you just think about the Espo tournament, here's what it would be like if they ran it next year. Oh, you could have ENCE there, because ENCE was number 69 in the world. You could have Yano there. But imagine if there just wasn't the Mongols and Heroic for them to win. What would that LAN have actually accomplished for ENCE? It would have maybe shown us what, that they're better than Bait or 9Z. You know what I mean? Like, that's nothing. The whole headline for ENCE was you beat like the 13 and 11 ranked teams in the world. And in fact, because of how Heroic played, it was actually a crazy story that you beat them, because everyone thought because of Rio, they're hands down going to win this fight. Right? Imagine the same LAN. Like, again, there's almost no point for anyone attending that LAN in that analogy. Like, ENCE has nothing to gain from it. And by the way, there's another thing that's also really negative, is because, as we pointed out, this is almost like an ELO system where if you lose to lesser opponents, it can hurt you. It's a bit like, essentially, if people don't get it, it's like how matchmaking works. There's actually a very quick thing. I won't do the whole usual rant. I'll make it a 30-second version. Most people are actually wrong when they complain about the points they got in matchmaking, because what they do is they pick the one time they got fuck all points and they go, what the hell? I lost 2 games and lost a whole bunch of points. Then I win a game and I get almost none. That's because the way the matchmaking algorithm is supposed to work in theory is it's not supposed to give you an even match every time. It's actually supposed to give you, like, I'll give you a random example, like a third of the time it gives you the bad team and the other team the good team, a third of the time it gives you the good team and them the bad team, and a third of the time it gives you an evenly matched team. Now the point there is, obviously when you're on the worst ranked team and you win that game, you're going to get way more points. When you won that game and you were like, I won it, I got none, that's because you probably actually had the advantageous team in the matchmaking system. Basically, here's the problem. That's how the scene's going to work if you're in tier 2. Like, another problem is, you know how I just said ENCE gained all that status, forget even points, just from beating Heroic? Those teams won't ever go to a tier 2 LAN. Like, Cole's even being generous. Fuck, Cole's way too high to ever go to these LANs. If you're in the top teams, all you are going to do is go from tier 1 $1 million tournament to tier 1 $1 million tournament to tier 1 million. That's all you're going to do. So even if you're bad, by the way, you're just going to become the 24th team at a 24-team LAN. That's it. Like, you're not going to then go down like we want, which is actually, I think, the best part about tier 2, which is, I mean, the best example, they fucked it up at this LAN, was someone like Mongols. Mongols, I actually think, was the team that had the most to give from that Espo tournament, because they never actually, like, yeah, no one cares about Yala Compass. This is like a real LAN that had Heroic there, bro. If you'd have won that LAN over a BO5 win over Heroic, you'd have got a lot of status in people's minds. You won't even attend a LAN like this in the future. You'll just, again, come like 9th place, and we'll have to figure out what we actually can't get the answer to now, which is, I said this before that semi-final, which is the problem Mongols had is all their wins are in like the group stage or something. They were never doing it on a big stage, so I wanted to see who the opponent is. Can you do it on the big stage? They proved in that scenario they couldn't, by the way. What if you just never get that answer? I'd have to wait till we go to the major or something, or crack a top 8 at Cologne or something. That's too far away. So I think there's actually a lot of negatives. And by the way, there's 2 more quick things to do, which is, I won't do the anti-cheat one because I'm not that much of an expert about cheating, but I will say it is insane, just the last year alone, how many times I have now heard. Here's the problem. When you guys say match fixing, they're all going to think you mean like fringe case like that, like a guy who used to be famous. No, you hear that like real top 30 teams match fix online in games that they just don't think matter, or it's like, I'll tell you, I'll just say it right now because I don't work this event. I have heard CCTs are just outrageous for it. So when you look at CCTs and you think, hey, it reminds me a bit of like Snow Sweet Snow Cups. Why is it you have all these like brackets where you look at the bracket and you go, these are top ranked teams, but they never win? Well, I've heard because there's outrageous amounts of throwing. And unfortunately, sometimes when those tournaments are meaningless to the teams, the favourites are exactly the people incentivized to throw because they can get the odds crazy high. Plus, when you lose, everyone goes, it's just an online tournament anyway. So I've heard the match fixing is crazy. Like, anyone thinking Richard Lewis is going to save you on that one, he's not. And spoiler, as I've always pointed out, the ultimate black pillow at match fixing is Richard Lewis had iBuyPower completely to rights. He had everything tracked. That literally isn't why Valve even banned them. Valve banned them because he went so far and above the evidentiary standard. He had an actual cell phone sent to him from America from the girlfriend of someone involved directly in the match fixing, where the person admitted it all over private text. Now, if you imagine he can get anything comparable to that to stop a bunch of we're not going to ever get to that standard, guys. In that scenario, he'd essentially sent Valve like the smoking gun and a picture of like them going, let's plan to kill him like this, and then like a vial of blood that could be traced. Like, bro, we can't do that. All he's going to be able to find is what you can find normally, which is like suspicious activity. The odds go way too high 1 second before the match goes live. They're way too good a team elsewhere. But the problem with that is that's all circumstantial. Even if I could watch it and go, well, I think they're cheating, I can tell you as a journalist, I wouldn't even be able to say they're cheating because I can't know that they actually threw that. I wouldn't have the evidence. So unfortunately, I don't think the match fixing one can be fixed. So I think in a world where they're all trapped in the hell of tier 2 and no top teams play, it's going to get worse. And then the last one I would mention is one of the things we often point out is a positive of being the team that grinds tier 2 is you get this insane body of work under your belt. Like you've played like every top 50 team basically a bazillion times in scrims or officials. You've played every map in your map pool, by the way. You don't ever have that thing. Do you remember when Team Liquid first made the lineup where Device became IGL? And at the first couple of lands, they were like making playoffs. But I always used to tell people, because this is before Overpass got took out, somehow their veto meant, though, they'd never played more than 5 maps on land. They'd never played the 6th map. No team yet had faced them who'd forced that through. And I used to think, bro, this is weird that you could have gone to like 3 lands and never have played 6 maps. Because if you play tier 2 competitions, you couldn't even go like 2 days without playing all 6 maps. Eventually you're going to face some other team that picks that map into you, or it gets done as the decider. So an upside is you get this mega well-vetted angle. But I've made this point to people before. The downside is you get burned out like a motherfucker. Like, have you noticed now when those teams cook, like the Montes of the world, the game, you hear them coming up, you hear these stories like, oh my God, there's super complexity in the online era, or they grind like motherfucker. The problem is, it feels like you eat up half of your lifespan when you actually get to the lands. Like when you get to the lands, you better win immediately because you've already grinded yourself for 3 months to death. Like those stats are terrifying when you hear those ones where it's like in 3 months people have played like over 100 maps. That's like, bro, remember that joke thing from Valorant is real. Like in Valorant, your entire professional career can be like, a year can be like, you play 40 maps or something. Like these people are playing 120 in 3 months. That's not even any lands. So I worry a lot about the match fixing and then actually the burnout angle as well. Because I also don't want it to be that like all of tier 2 is essentially just a glorified online cop player now. Like, because the other bomber is when you see these up and coming talents and you go to that HLTV page, bro, you'd think we're in the online era. Some of them have no lands. You click LAN and it's like he's played like 2 lands in 3 years. What? Like that's another part where the scene's transition in a way that I think's actually not that healthy, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on towards that, I mean, you've got teams like Permitter or whatever. They've played 439 maps this year. Like, I mean, bear in mind, that probably started from like February onwards. It's actually insane, like how many games they play. But then, I mean, I have a feeling that next year we're going to see teams who are actually like doing the IRL version of like face it Q dodging due to like that ELO, because they're going to work out, right? If I win, I have to win this X amount of games to gain ELO. But if I lose just 1 or 2 games, I'm going to lose ELO for the tournament. So they're going to start like min-maxing every tournament. And I think that's where it actually hurts the domestic scene quite a lot. And because even like teams like, Complexity go into like, so I was there on the desk when they did like, they won ESL Challenger Jönköping. And like, it was a bit of a risk for them, but they really wanted silverware. They hadn't had silverware under their belt for a long time, and it was a way for them to gain back confidence because they went into CS2 being one of the best improvement teams. To CS2, and then they lost all of it. They were looking dreadful, and they actually did super well. They ended up winning it, beating Falcons in the final. But next year, they're going to have no reason to even risk that. Where for this year, it was more of like, we don't really care about the money because it's only like $100,000 prize pool, and they only win like 50K for first place. Or maybe the silverware is obviously nice, but it was more for the mental side. Get the side ready for like a big push in towards 2024. There's gonna be no reason to risk that, and it doesn't help when you've only got like 2 TOs in next year. I think it's only like a few ESL events and Starland. They're the only open qual, so you're not gonna see like any tier 2 teams, as Maui was saying, start to move up. Like, I don't think anybody else at like the top 35 is gonna be able to like really actually like find ways to properly move up. So all these tournaments, all these teams from outside are gonna have to have like massive business changes where it's gone from being like we're major hopeful teams who are like on the fringe, and now we're just gonna have to become stepping stone teams. So you're never gonna see a team like a Sangal or a Bait or a Saw who kind of come out of the woodwork and nowhere, grind through tier 2, earn open qual spots to go to LAN, and then get those like big move ups in towards like the top 30, top 40, whatever. Saw are like 14th in the world right now, right? You're never gonna see that again if things don't change and how the circuit is. And it unfortunately could end up being being not as bad, but it can end up being a little bit like the Valve Tier 2 circuit, where people just don't give a shit, basically, because they just know these teams are never going to make it to an IEM, or never going to make it to like a Blast World Finals or whatever. They're never going to take that one chance, like when Saw ended up qualing through like the Spring Showdown, and I don't know, and that kickstarted the 2024. That might like never happen again, because they came through the Iberian qualifier of the Blast Online stage, beating like Movistar. Unfortunately, that feels like it might not happen again, so it might be like a bit Val Tier 2-esque, where it's just a bit of a wasteland.
Right, do you all put them out?
Yeah. I could get into my ugly point here. So this is kind of about the article that Nero recently published regarding statistics and the kind of when is it going to happen? When are we going to actually get this Counter-Strike data revolution? And the reason I make this an ugly point is I almost feel like the article was written rhetorically for his own website, because I feel like the bottleneck for the data revolution which Nero wants to happen, and I will say this as before we even get into it, like Nero obviously is pushing for people to have as much possible data at their fingertips as he can, for without seemingly giving up too much of the proprietary data and information that is held by HLTV, because at many points in time it felt like HLTV kind of hid some of the stats from us, so that I assume this is just so that they could write articles and they could be the ones that have it. Now, thankfully, part of the website's functionality and part of the reason that it's trafficked as much as it is because people are going to it to sift through the numbers which they have listed on their site. And Nero has even gone a step further and put several of the charts that he uses, and I'm sure the HLTV staff use privately, to show things like arena rating, elimination game rating, positional, like the positions of a lot of different players and their expected rating per the positions that they play, given the averages of all people that are playing in like the top 30 or top 50 at that spot. And he writes this whole article about the fact that you can get all this data from Counter-Strike demos at every single tick, and for somebody that's a stats lover, this should be your dream. And when again, I'll even preface it like this: like, I studied stats at Columbia, and that's what I have a bachelor's in stats. Like, I looked at a lot of stats, I went through a lot of charts for a lot of the people that were in my classes. One of them, funnily enough, was Nicole Lapointe, who was my TA, actually, the EG.
Oh, you never
CEO.
told me about that before. Holy moly. Okay.
Yeah, she was actually grading my papers at one point, and other people mostly just worked for the government, worked for big pharma, and people that just got like high-paying finance jobs on top of that. So I have a pretty decent background. It's not a professional background technically, because I just got into esports, but I was studying among people that were getting obviously really nice jobs. But like, the biggest thing in that space is that is data mining. Like, data mining is so important. It's how do you actually get the figures with which you are supposed to analyze and then give any sort of results from them. And that's because and the problem with Counter-Strike is that there is so much data that we can work with, but getting it is the hard part. And I feel like, and so C9 Win, a guy that I've talked to a lot, because he does comp sci. That's his professional. He's a professional software engineer. He talked to me about the fact that when you are using HLTV website, you get rate limited all the time, because when you try to download the demos in mass, Cloudflare blocks you. And also on top of that, he told me that you are actually, by scraping their demos as thoroughly as he is with automated features, which he used to have a CS demo downloader where you could just click a team on that downloader. It was an application that you'd have to get, and it would just download every demo. It would download every single demo of all these teams, and it would scrape HLTV to do that. But basically, there's in the terms of service of HLTV, that's illegal. Like, you can get sued for that. So he can't keep doing that. He can't keep running that. And so and the thing is, like, demo databases are harder and harder to get. FaceIt has now made it such that you are not allowed to just scrape demos from their website for any reason. Like that's why Leadify, if people were playing on FaceIt in the last handful of years, you probably, if you were really serious about your own gameplay, you might have linked your FaceIt account to your Leadify account, in which case Face or Leadify would automatically parse your demo and then spit out a ton of different stats and results. It's kind of like Dota buff if people played that at any point, where you would just get all this extra information that the game didn't give you by pressing tab at the end of it, and it would tell you all these things you can work on, all these things about your opponents, and it would try to make sense of all that data. And it wasn't perfect, but it was really fun to look at in my eyes because, over long periods of time, it would say like, okay, I need to work on my spray. I need to work on my counter strafing, whatever it was. Oh, I need to work on you making sure I use my utility before I die. But now FaceIt blocks you from doing that. Like you can't actually even scrape their website. And you were talking Ne0kai about Ross from Endpoints. One of the ways that he was able to find these players, these diamonds in the rough, is by scraping FaceIt demos. But now you can't even scrape FaceIt demos legally. You can't legally do it. You could still do it. Like I'm sure you could do it. You could probably get around it, but you are violating their TOS. They are trying to block people from doing this. And the problem is that like websites like HLTV and FaceIt are simply bottlenecking what could be a data revolution in this space. And so that's why I'm bringing this up. Like I almost feel like he is actually writing this article, which got such positive reception, so that not even the fans can read it. I'm pretty sure he's writing this so his own bosses can read this, because they need to be the ones that actually unlock all of this data. All of this huge gold mine of data is being locked behind the fact that you are getting rate limited by Cloudflare on HLTV's website, despite the fact you can download quickly. And on top of that, like people don't right now, like even if you got all of them, you'd have to know how to parse them. You'd have to know what you're looking for, all that. But I think the main thing is the ugly point of this is like great article, Nero. It is your company that is actually stopping this from happening, by the way.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I definitely don't have as much of a stats background. I'm pretty average at MOUZ, I gotta say. But first of all, the article is insane. This could be like, Nero's sort of magnum opus, at least so far, right? This is an insane article. I like what he's going through. I like the people he brings in, especially like the Skybox stuff. I've just started recently getting into like the Skybox Edge and like kind of going through like my own stuff. And then also like just as a fun way to break down players and like see if like the numbers back what I'm saying as well. But yeah, I agree. I mean, like I had no idea about like the TOS limitations. I mean, I don't really download them en masse. I just sort of one at a time when I'm focusing on players, but it does actually limit things quite massively. And I think until we get to a point of having like a super open kind of data, especially when you consider like, I mean, it's always really easy for me to say this, but like the football equivalent, like there is hundreds of like websites, free or paid, where you can just go in and then look up at every little data point, every single player. Just like for context, like someone I live with, for example, works for a Premier League professional time as a sports scientist. Like their little data things that they wear on their chest as well. A lot of that data, even especially on match days, a lot of that is made public. How much they run, efficiency outputs, yada yada. So all of this stuff makes it very easy to break down for like other, I guess, people, even for the average person. I've gone and looked to see like what the efficiency rates of certain football players are they doing their jobs, etc. And you can break down all the stats. It happens in NBA all the time as well, with players, what their efficiencies are like. And I think the one thing in terms of like just something that hasn't been touched on, but I guess it's just sort of a thing for me, but I think there's a negative side in a massive way to data as a whole, is like I grew up watching football. We always call it the Barclays area, where we had all these like, people shooting for like 40 yards out and this, that, and the other. And over time, with people like Pep Guardiola coming in, it's like ruined football in a viewing experience way, in the sense of like, it's all about XG, expected goals. So like, my XG, if I shoot from like 35 plus yards out, is like a 0.01. But if I do 1,000 passes, play the super boring style and wait for the right opportunity, I'm going to win 1-0. But it's not what I want as a spectator. It's why I hated watching England play at the World Cup. Like we win games, but it was super boring because it was all like percentage based. And I think to a degree that's happened in Counter-Strike a bit, where it means you don't get these like insane, stupid kind of plays, which maybe increases the skill ceiling a little bit. But I look at this now and with kind of the stats thing of like, if all that data isn't public, I don't think, we're basically locked until we find alternative ways, but I don't even know if that's really possible. I don't really know how it works, like Skybox, for example, or even Leadify. I only see my own data on that. So I'm not too sure how it works in terms of like a pro level, but I think you're right. I feel like unless you see like HLTV or Face It like unlock this code so people can actually scrape it and break it down, it's going to really limit everything. And they're talking in the article about like how they use it to scout players and how they're kind of utilizing it in terms of like a business way as well, with like, you know, teams like EG having like I think it's Valens they were talking about, like him as like head of data science and whatever. But like, how hard must their job be if they don't even have the full access to everything? Like, what data is not known that could really affect like whether this player, like, you know, this player may look good in terms of certain data outputs, but, you know, without me scraping it, quote unquote, like illegally, I guess, like I'm actually going to see that actually it's really shit when it comes to certain things like trading and whatever and all this stuff. So yeah, I agree. I feel like until it's open, it really does limit everything. And it's like, if HLTV are the main proprietor of this, then it kind of is like a semi-dig at his own company in a way.
No, I actually think it's well done, though, because it's essentially like he's trying to just philosophically win them over to like the positives of the argument. Because I could do this myself. It's just the problem is people will just assume because of stupid online internet beefs I'm just being biased against HLTV. The problem I have goes like this. On one level, HLTV has essentially been selling like money, like old rope for money. Like they don't generate any of that data. All they do is they helped in the past literally host the HLTV service. But in the modern day, they just are like a hub for where you list all the games, and then also sometimes they run the servers, and then obviously they get the demos, and then they can scrape their own database. Now, with that said, there's two angles to this. One, what I'm getting at there is they're not the one like creating what they're doing. They're just the one gathering all the info. But that is not nothing. Like, if they didn't do it, would someone else do it? Like, I think the different companies would do certain things. Like a North American one would do something, and maybe a European one. Maybe they wouldn't be like as exhaustive a thing. I mean, no one else has a business model actually to support currently doing that sort of thing. Maybe someone like Face It would attempt it because they would try and connect, I don't know, pro to semi-pro and amateur. That's probably the other angle you could do it from. So I do think they deserve a lot of credit in the sense that they are the ones doing it. If we didn't have this website, we would have a very impoverished scene. Like, I can tell you in games where you can't just script the stage and you have to manually collect some of it, it's a nightmare, and it means you don't have the ability to look things up. Like, I can tell you, if you're a fan of any sport in the modern day, one of the best things is all those stats websites like the Basketball Reference and stuff like that. Like, I can tell you the stuff that you can find on there that it takes way longer if you're going to just watch the games. Like, I'll give you an example. Back in the day, when people only looked up the really obvious stats in basketball, like points per game or what your overall field goal percentage is. Well, one thing they were able to do in the last like 20 plus years is now they'll even show you there like a literal breakdown of where the shot takes place on the floor. So what you found actually was there's certain players, famous examples like Michael Jordan, where they're not just good at like their signature shot, they're like unbelievably good. Like they hit like 90% of shots in that particular range. It's just that their game isn't only taking that shot. So I do think there's so much can be gained, and especially, here's the thing, I don't think it gives you answers. I've always said stats like are like signposts pointing in directions. The more stats you have, this is like a better map that can just take you further places. So I do think there's so many things as analysts, as content creators, by the way, as news websites, as fucking like coaches that could be done with this data. But the other angle I'll say, to be fair, is this, which is I totally understand though why HLTV doesn't just give it out for free. One, some of the people in their site have sort of a, let's say, like property mindset of like, I own this and I earned it and I gathered it, so it's mine and I don't have to share with you. Which I'll just say I think it's a little bit uncharitable in the sense that like you are relying on Valve allowing you to do all this. Like, if they come in tomorrow, like, by the way, Riot Games has done in certain games, and just say that's over, we control our data. In fact, you know what? Here's the angle you don't want to think of your HLTV. If this was Riot Games, they would just straight up say to you, in fact, you have to pay us a license and we'll give you the info, and then you can do what you want with it through your company, and they would like essentially dip into your pockets and take some of your fucking sponsorship money in that analogy. But I do think that, so here's the reason why I think it's not totally unfair what they do. As pointed out there, people will always abuse any goodwill you give them in this community. So it's not just that they're blocking me and Maui finding out some obscure advanced stats. They're also blocking dickheads who would build their own entire third-party business from just every day scraping your website and downloading a million files. And like you say about that download for the demo thing, they'll even do it in an abusive tech whiz way where it's like, hey, look, you want to see that team? I've just clicked a button and we've downloaded every demo. In that scenario, by the way, if you're not going to watch all those demos, you're just wasting HLTV's fucking hosting traffic. You've just downloaded 1 million demos because you can just press a button, and you've actually just made them pay for a whole bunch of traffic to their site. So I do think there are elements people also don't think about that are real world factors. But to come back on the whole thing of the like stats revolution, he is right. Like, I actually think it was very well framed, because you're right, Maui. The joke is the warden keeping those stats locked up is just his bosses. Like, the info's already there. We want it out. They want it out. Like, we can make it happen tomorrow. But I also do think there's a lot of like financial and like business considerations that, as usual, make things things trickier than just saying, like, let them eat data, as it were. Like, in this scenario, they can't just give us everything. I do think, though, one of the reasons you see me complain way less about that topic is because of people like Nero and King Dempts and Note, etc. Because my other thing that pissed me off back in the day, Maui, was they always had this data. They just didn't even use it themselves. They used to just sit there like Smaug with a bunch of gold that they don't even spend. And it's like, well, can we fucking have some of it then? I at least can appreciate now that people like Nero use the data and then make like an article or make like a visual graph or guide or something that can give people a sense of what they say. By the way, counteract narratives in the scene. Like I thought, by the way, this is what shows the value of data. He was able, in one article, to crystallize the point I've tried to make about Blame F for about fucking 4 years, which is, yes, I can see with my eyes he goes horny for ecos, but that's because he's sick at the game and ecos. It's not one or the other. He was never just going and only farming Glocks people and then not killing anyone with an AK. He's good at both, right? The problem is, every other time I made that point, people thought I was either saying he isn't eco killing, which his eyes tell you he is, or they were saying he's not ever getting real kills, which your eyes also would tell you he is getting the real kills. That article, with the way it presented the data, made my argument about 100 times simpler than when I've tried to like awkwardly talk around the issue of like, think about the way he plays and his role, and you can see that he's like it just the data just got through because of the way it was framed. So I do think he's already scratching the surface, by the way, there. For real, if you actually had more data and especially more public access, you could have some incredible content pieces, I'm telling you. I mean, even simple things that, like, think of some of the things Vo's done just with the eye test of like showing people aiming high and low. By the way, you could just get that data. I can tell you the stats engines can literally pull that data out of like, whenever you're in a duel, do you aim at this height or that height, or what's your time to kill, how far's the crosshair from the head, etc. Like, there's actually so much. And I think actually the key thing you've touched on there is, especially for people who are on the pro side, like the actual coaching side of the game, I feel like there is so much they could do, because back in the day, they had the most manual version of this job. They would literally just download the last 3 demos, watch the last 3 demos, and then basically play the game like the next morning. If instead you really can, as a coach, pull in loads of data and then be super specific, there are so many things you can do. I mean, we were having that conversation earlier about like analyzers and stuff. Imagine if when you were playing some random tier 2 online cop that's normally a nightmare, you have no idea who the opponent is, you could press a button and it instantly analyzed all their players and showed you like who the strongest aimers were and in what scenarios they were like really good and where they were really dangerous and they got all the like eco round wins or something. That would be insane to have that instantly generated 1 second before you go into a game. So I actually think we've only scratched the surface on the stats things. Obviously, as usual, it's how you apply them. And I also agree with Ne0kai. There will be downsides, by the way. There'll be certain times where, like, basically, people figure out scenarios where you don't go for a player. Like, one of the obvious things it could kill instantly in CS is, imagine some fucker like James actually gets access to this and he figures out, like, mathematically it's correct to save all the time. Like, well, great. Like, as you say, we found out the efficient way to play CS. But yes, it is also like, where if you don't know, guys, the football example is, what I actually think is the greatest goal ever is that Ronaldo Man United goal against Porto, where he just blasts it from like 48 yards out or something, and it unironically just goes in the top corner. If you don't know, literally every coach in the modern day would tell you, even if that goes in, don't ever shoot that again. Like, that makes no sense. You should always do that shit passing in the box and just hope so. But the problem is, as I've just said, when someone scores that goal, it makes football worth watching, doesn't it? It's why you watch. So I'll say it's actually a good thing to put in the ugly section also, because it's not like universally good. It's not universally bad either, by the way. I think there's a lot of fair reasons to why it's gone this way. And I don't know if the world's healing, but at least the people who are dickheads at HL TVs don't address me anymore. So as long as the cool people do, we can all just have a great time and keep coming on the shows. Right, the last point of the show is going to be my ugly point. And this is so incredibly on brand. So here we go. And remember, I've purposely picked ugly for this. I didn't put bad and I didn't put good. And here's why. I didn't say it's good that s1mple, the GOAT, is back and he's playing really well. He is. Because there's massive negatives. Falcons is shit. But I didn't say it's bad either. I didn't say Falcons being shit is why it's bad that s1mple's back and he's good. The reason it's ugly is because, one, I saw there was actually a detail. Richard made this video, by the way, like ages ago. But when he did his video about Falcons and s1mple joining, he revealed in that video that basically, if s1mple, apparently it's on s1mple, if s1mple likes it in Falcons and wants to stay, potentially he can join their team next year when Nico joins, and for like a discount to them, as opposed to like, you know, that touted $3 million fee that was obviously so insane, I don't think anyone would have paid it anyway, and that's why Falcons did a loan to sort of see what level it's for. Now, the reason I put this as ugly is because that does imply what I've actually said about Falcons all the time, which is you don't have to worry that they're shit now, because, spoiler, if they're really going to get to keep simple and NE0kai's joining next year, well, one, that already could make you cracked. And then two, the part people really miss about building rosters is the reason Falcons was in so much trouble is they never did get the NE0kai or s1mple before. The second you get those players, and by the way, I'm telling you right now, guys, if you get NE0kai and s1mple, it's almost, you'd have to actually be the worst GM in history ever to not get a good team. Because even if that team sucks, every role player will join your team now, immediately. Like, if you go, you could just take up the HLTV top 20 and about, like, the joke is like 80 players will just, yes. They'd instantly join because you've got already NE0kai and s1mple. Like, they're smart enough to know if I play with them, I will win. So the reason I say it's ugly is, one, I still think there's positive could come even if it's line up shit and they have to, like, wipe the deck and change 3 players. But I also will say, as I alluded to at the beginning, I don't miss when it comes to this guy. Like, you have to understand, I wasn't gambling on, like, his talent. I know this guy is an insane grinder. Like, he has the craziest work ethic ever. It's funny, he can bill it as all these negative, maybe he's egotistical, maybe he thinks he should be, whatever it is, it works, mate. And you saw, even though he's had all that time off, remember, he's only just played his first ever land maps, guys. I'm not even trolling. He never even had 3 bad maps in a row. Every time he would even have a scuffed map, the next map he would unironically carry, even when they lost all those games. And it didn't matter how badly people played around him, he did exactly what you dream of. He hit the fucking flick shots. He was doing the s1mple no-scopes. He was even going for the clutch shot. It's literally, if you're a s1mple fan, this was like the dream comeback. So yes, obviously Falcons is shit at the moment. They don't even win maps. That is a problem. But I thought he looked actually really good out the gate. And this is why I'm so glad he at least got his chance again, because you give him time. Like, look, you're not small. You should, by the way, he shouldn't even really be this good instantly, but it just shows you, like, s1mple just has something, an extra quality. And by the way, I would absolutely give the same room if, like, Zeru took 6 months off, or NE0kai took a year off, or m0NESY had like a hand injury or something. When they come back, you've got to give people like that like a real chance, because you just saw, remember, this guy literally hadn't played a land map of CS, and instantly, by the way, he looked immediately like a top 20 player in the world. I'm not even trolling. Like, in some of the rounds, he already looked like he was back. So I think even though right now it's a mega scuffed setup, and who even knows if this 5-man line even ever plays next year, I think this, I won't put it as good because it's so negative on Falcons, but I think it's an ugly point. I'm going to say it's ugly. s1mple's back and he's in Falcons.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. So I've had the kind of the fortune of working both of the events that s1mple's kind of come back.
All right.
His debut with Thunderpick, I was working that group. I was actually meant to be on his debut game, but we were flying back from Elisa, so I had to kind of swap the shifts into the evening shift. So I got to see his, well, I mean, I guess I got kind of lucky in the sense I got the elimination game that he had, which is the VP one. But even then,
probably his best series as well.
Exactly. You still got to see kind of the signs of life out of him. I mean, he still looked just unbelievable, and he was the only one. I mean, like, everyone else in his team was like nowhere near even like remotely positive, and he was like absolutely flying. So yeah, s1mple looked fantastic. There's, you know, everything to love there for him. So yeah, I'm with you. I think obviously for me, this is without a doubt feeling like a Falcons like dead team, but like not a buff. You know, it's just like they're just a dead team. There's evidently going to be changes coming through. I think, you know, there's very good arguments to make that like any of the 4 outside. I mean, I've seen this like kind of narrative a lot, especially with people who work in the scene, of like making arguments for like any other 4 bar s1mple of like who would they change for them kind of thing. But s1mple's the other one where like everybody's saying like, yeah, fair enough. I mean, the only argument that I've seen people make as a vice versa is that like s1mpius was obviously the best player on this team, but s1mple was just such an upgrade. Like, I mean, even though it's like it's all about potential, and from what we've seen so far, he's looked great. And then obviously at ESL Challenger Katowice, I was there when they finished dead last, but again, you still got to see the good signs alive out of him. I mean, even against Turn Off Fire, man, he had Woxic absolutely pocketed that entire game. Woxic had no space at range that entire game, and he really struggled to look kind of, you know, as clean as he was. And it does make you kind of argue that if maybe in a couple of those maps, if Xantares wasn't as clean as he was, that s1mple could have done enough to even get them a map, right? I mean, obviously that was the big thing, like that, especially that Inferno, they really looked awkward, but they did have an overtime on Dust too, where s1mple got to showcase what he's got. So I'm with you. I think, you know, I'm really glad that we're seeing s1mple back in the server. You know, the GOAT obviously for a reason, and still has got that level. As much as people want to say, like, I mean, the class thing is like saying he's washed, like he isn't like farming face it every single day. Like, this is the stupid thing about it. It's like people say he's washed because like he has no games HTV, or like the classic one was like when he like lost against Metasport, even though again he still did fine, right? And it's like it's 1 best of 3 first of all, hasn't played the game at all at a pro level since CS2 came out, but they still want to say it's washed because of 1 best of 3, which is fucking crazy first of all. But then you see this guy play like anything else online as well, like face it or whatever, and he's still sick. I mean, I even saw something, and this is kind of stupid, but like he played against like 2 blatant cheaters, and he still beat them. And it's like, you know,
Sure.
you got you guys crying about cheating left, right, and center in Premiere, which obviously is a bit of a problem, and it does absolutely no effect towards s1mple. So I mean, it's one of those things for me. Like people just like to bitch and moan just because they like to be edgy, but I think the realization is next year is that when this team actually comes, you know, is like a full team, when, you know, Ne0kai joins and whoever else ends up joining us, there's kind of all these rumors about it. People are going to start like eating their words and flip back the other way, as they all were when s1mple's at his best. You know, Stockholm 2021 saying like, this guy's the GOAT, he never left. And it's going to be the same thing, like as I mentioned with like kassad thing. I should even start doing that. I should just go and bookmark the post of the people who are saying like, oh, this guy's fucking washed and he's a bot and he should retire or whatever, and just see what they're like in a year's time when Falcons are actually playing well, and when this team's actually fixed, and when they're actually at the level with all the players that they really want are in the server and they're winning. Because, you know, ultimately there will come a point where Falcons actually start competing, because it's impossible that they won't with the name value they're going to have in the server if Ne0kai joins and whoever else joins. Maybe it requires like an IGL change or whatever as the case is, but it's going to be a case where they start doing well in tournaments, and I just want to see whether people just completely flip again and say, oh yeah, he never left, it was just you know, bad team, it wasn't his fault, which is kind of the thing that we're sort of saying now. He's doing his job and doing it very well on a very dysfunctional team that is basically dead in the water. They even know it, we all know it. This team is going to go through some sort of change, and probably the vibes are a little bit off, right? I mean, even saw I challenge a kassad, the vibes were most definitely off. There was a lot of tilt, a lot of people like definitely, there was so little comms as well. Like I saw like times where like they were having tack pauses and like Snappy didn't even know what to say, right? Because they were like losing like, you know, 10-2 or whatever. So I think it's just inevitable that this s1mple, like this move will end up working out for the best. It's just people like to hate just because it's like a big name.
Yeah, this is just pretty stark difference versus how he looked when he was on Metasport or against Metasport earlier in the year in those online games. Like his rifling is so solid now. In the VP series, I just checked to make sure. He only got 13 op kills of his 41 kills, and because so many of those frags were just good rifle multi-kills, his mechanics with rifling now, like he wasn't playing CS2 at the beginning. When I looked at his what he did against Metasport, he was just so stationary, just like he didn't really do all the little donk slide sort of things that you need to do when you're taking so kind of like 50-50 duels. You do like so many top players now when they're entering a rifle v rifle fight, they'll kind of like randomly, it's almost like the donk slide, which I've shown in the past on my own YouTube, but they'll also just kind of like instantly crouch and hit a random strafe key, A or D, if they're the one that's stationary. And s1mple can do that, and he can still track the target so well with the rifle, which is really hard. Like usually the whole point of that is it makes you harder to hit for your opponent. You're not, and sometimes the fights get a little messy because the time to kill has increased for both players. But actually, s1mple can just headshot people when he crouches to just offset his opponent's crosshair placement, which is really, really hard, mechanically speaking, because usually you're supposed to be facing somebody who's also doing it, but it's not even that he's just doing it with the op. That's what's so impressive. But when he does have it, like, he probably is like, he's the player that looks the freest flowing in terms of his movements and what he thinks is available, and already his game sense is so strong that he'll use it like a shotgun. He'll also be able to hit pretty far flicks with it. Like he's caught up to speed so quickly, but I know that he's obviously been playing a lot of FaZe games, and I just think that as it stands right now, s1mple is going to give the top players a run for their money next year. I think Thorin definitely got a little crazy on Hot Take Point Mate saying they're going to make playoffs. Like, the rest of this team is ass right now, but at the same time...
I mean, my s1mple prediction was good. That could happen, but the team has to be able to win a game, Maui. You have to win a map.
Exactly. The predictions about him as an individual player, I think you're going to be closer than anybody at this point.
Oh, so by the way, that's one last thing I'd maybe say as well, which is I'll just use this as an example of how people take things that aren't facts and treat them like they're facts. Just because s1mple told us, one, I don't like CS2, and then two, I might be a rifler now. People acted like that meant, one, he could never be good at CS2 and he could never AWP ever again, which is like, what? Because as you saw, like, I agree, by the way, he didn't force the AWP, but he looked good even when he was AWPing. He was like hitting all the flicks you'd want him to hit. In fact, the irony was he was actually doing that thing like the Drake and shit where you hit all the hard shots and miss some of the normal ones. So that was actually sort of a positive. It just showed me in like a month or two, it'll be tuned up, it'll all be good.